station, which essentially combined her working area together with the amenities of a kitchen. Joy had been talking on the video phone in Jenny's private office bedroom because out in the main room, there was only a normal phone. Of course, Jenny's police station wasn't the real one where all the officers in Viridian worked, since it wasn't big enough and there was no jail area for prisoners. Her station was mostly for private living use, while the main one was located elsewhere in the city. Which was the case for most all Jennies in every city, since they were usually always the heads of their respective police departments and had their own private stations. Upon walking out into the main area of the station, she saw Ash and Misty putting on their shoes and hoisting their bags onto their shoulders as they prepared to leave. Jenny was over at her desk, meanwhile, typing on her computer. "Are you two getting ready to leave?" the sweet-natured nurse asked as the two kids finished preparing and stood up from the blue couch they had been sitting on. "Yeah," Ash looked up at her and replied. "Me and Misty talked about it earlier and we wanna get an early start if we're gonna be heading into the Viridian forest." Joy looked between the two of them and then asked, "Well, I thought you had just come to Viridian together to get your Pokémon healed up and to have Misty's bike looked at." The redhead in question nodded and then gave a small shrug. "Yeah, but after the explosion at the center, my bike was lost. We really don't have any reason to visit that shop you told us about yesterday now. And besides, it's safer to go through the Viridian forest with someone else." Joy nodded in understanding and then Ash looked over at the athletic young girl next to him. "Actually, Misty, I wanted to ask you something." She tilted her head at him. "Yeah." Rubbing the back of his head, the young rookie thought about what he wanted to say for a minute before finally speaking. "Well, I was just thinking. I've really come to like your company, Misty, and you seem like a person I could get along with. You may not want to and I totally understand if you don't, but would you like to travel with me?" The girl with the side ponytail blinked in surprise at his offer and repeated, "You want me to come along with you? On your journey?" Ash looked at Pikachu on his shoulder. "Well, not just me, Pikachu likes you too and he agreed with me. He'd like it if you came along with us too." The little electric mouse nodded and smiled at the girl with a cute chirp of agreement. "Pika." The boy looked back at her again and offered a small smile. "So, what do you say? Wanna come along?" Misty stared at him for a few moments without speaking before, finally, she returned his smile with a bright one of her own. "Sure, I'd love to. You seem really nice, Ash, and you did more for me than you had to after you and Pikachu saved me from that Gyarados. You carried my bike all the way here for me and you were really brave standing up against those criminals last night." She reached up and gently rubbed Pikachu between the ears, causing him to coo happily. "I don't really have anywhere to be and I think I would enjoy traveling with the two of you." She then withdrew her hand and held it out to Ash. "Let's do it." Grinning, he stuck out his own hand and shook the one offered to him. "All right, looks like we're a team." Seeing that, Joy smiled sweetly and clasped her hands together. "Oh, isn't that wonderful? Two young Pokémon trainers deciding to travel together and help each other achieve their dreams." At that same moment, Jenny sighed and turned away from her computer. "Finally, that mess last night has caused a massive uproar for our precinct. I've been answering emails and typing up police reports all morning." She then frowned and clenched the fist she had resting on one of the armrests. "I still can't believe we didn't catch the lowlives responsible for all of this." Ash looked at her and shrugged. "Well, they must be better at staying under the radar than we thought. I really don't think it was your fault, Officer Jenny, you had police blockades everywhere in town." She stood up and hit her fist into her other hand. "Well, I've emailed the warrant with their pictures, along with the information you two gave me about them, to several police departments in other cities. When they finally slip up, we'll catch them." Misty looked at her new traveling companion. "I doubt we'll see them again, but it'd probably be a good idea to keep our eyes open." He nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I'm just glad Mom and Professor Oak bought the story I told them last night about us getting out of the center before it exploded. They were pretty worried when they saw the news reports and called me. Mom wouldn't have been happy to hear I got involved with stopping a group as dangerous as Team Rocket." She smiled in amusement hearing that. So you just didn't tell them the whole truth then, huh? He chuckled maripishly and rubbed the back of his neck. Well, I guess you could say that. After their conversing was finished, Jenny volunteered to see them off with Joy joining in. Soon, Ash and Misty were standing out on the street in front of the police station with both older women ready to say their parting farewells. Ash, Misty, Jenny began. You two performed a selfless and very brave act in standing up against those villains last night. You performed a service to this city and to the people in it by being so courageous, and you saved the lives of a lot of Pokémon. For all of this, I salute you. She then struck a pose and saluted both of them while Joy smiled. Yes, I cannot thank either of you enough. Not only did you save me and my Chansey, but you also rescued all of the Pokémon in the center last night. Without you, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. Ash and Misty both went a little red in the face and modestly accepted the praise before the latter raised her finger and asked, in order to devote the embarrassing focus off of them. How are your Chansey anyway, Nurse Joy? They didn't get hurt at all after last night, did they? I never really got a chance to ask. The thin and pretty young nurse gave a soft laugh in return. Oh, they're just fine, Misty, thank you. A little shaken up, but they're resting in their Pokeballs right now, so I'm sure they will be okay once they get some rest. At that, Ash lightly scratched his temple and sighed. I don't know, Nurse Joy, I still feel really bad that we couldn't actually save your center. Holding her hand up, she shook her head. No, Ash, please don't feel bad. You two and your Pokémon did everything you could do. Besides, the Pokémon League is sending me more medical equipment to compensate for what was lost. They're also going to pay to get me set up in a temporary location somewhere here in the city until they can build a new center. She then folded her hands down in front of her and smiled in amusement. It's funny, but you really should know that we had plans to remodel the old center at some point. This will just make it easier since they'll have to build a new one from ground up. He looked up at her. Yeah, but what about all the Pokémon that got sent to the Pewter City Pokémon Center and their trainers? She shook her head. No worries. In that interview with the news crews last night, I made an announcement to all the trainers that their Pokémon were safe and sound and had been sent to the Pewter City Center. I should be expecting a whole host of them to show up sometime today wanting details. To Ash and Misty's relief, she expounded. The Pokémon League should be sending me a new teleporter machine in 2 or 3 days, and if I can get the trainers to wait that long, my sister at Pewter City should be able to just send all the Pokémon back to me. Looking visibly relaxed, the newfound trainer straightened up and sighed. Well, that's good to know, Nurse Joy, thanks for putting my mind at ease. He then looked at Misty. You ready to head out? She nodded and then looked back at the two public service officials. Thanks again for being so kind to us while we were here, Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy. Ash gave a small bow of his head. Yeah, thanks, really, I appreciate it too, ladies. Jenny winked and held up her thumb. You kids just be safe and take care of each other. And come back soon to see us, Joy added kindly. I really look forward to seeing you both again. Hopefully things will be more settled by then. With their goodbyes said, Ash and Misty turned and started making their way down the long road ahead of them. After looking back to wave once more, they settled their gazes straight ahead and, as they went, he glanced at his new companion and smiled. You know, Misty, I'm glad we met. It'll be nice having someone else along. Looking up at Pikachu, Ash chuckled. Right, buddy. Pikachu. The energetic electric type responded excitedly. I'm looking forward to it too, the orange-haired girl admitted sincerely. It'll be nice traveling with someone else and not being alone all the time. Those words said, the newly minted trio continued on their way down the road. They were on track to leave Viridian City behind and enter the vast, wild and dense woodland known infamously as the Viridian Forest. Fortunately, they now had each other, and that knowledge alone brought them both much greater comfort. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX for Ash, Misty and Pikachu to leave the sprawling urban environment of Viridian behind. Now, in only an hour, they had finally entered the thick, vast and wild expanse of the forest that was named after the aforementioned city. Indeed, the Viridian forest was aptly described as being a dense and exponentially sizable woodland. Very unlike the city it was named after, the forest in question was completely its polar opposite. The landscape was thick with large, thick and towering trees, their leafy tops stretching high up into the air like massive hands. Moreover, the trees were so near to each other that the tops grew close together and all but totally shut out the sky above in certain places. The grass was very tall along the sides of the road in random sections, providing an ideal hiding spot for Pokémon of various kinds. Although, the underbrush and vibrantly green thicket growing under the trees, out in the forest itself, served as an even greater home for the resident bug types that famously called it their abode. For almost 3 hours, from 9 to 12 noon, Ash and Misty trekked the well-worn road that extended on through the endless forest. The path itself was the only thing around that had any semblance of human maintenance, and even that was only because it served as the main road through the forest. At around lunchtime, the two of them stopped for a break and Ash used that period to have the daily training session that they had missed staying with Officer Jenny. Thus, while Misty sat down to watch on a nearby log, albeit tepidly due to her great hatred of bug types, as Ash had learned about, he let his Pokémon out and got to work. While Pikachu, Spearow and Badoo were set to their own training routines and did so without any prompting from their trainer, Ash spent a while getting Rattata and his Nidoran duo adjusted to the same training system. The first thing he did was observe what his 3 newly captured Pokémon were capable of. Rattata, for his part, proved to be a strong fighter and a relentless brawler. In a test battle against Pikachu, he proved to be fast, but, unlike most Rattata that preferred striking quickly and then hurrying away, he was quite different. This Rattata liked attacking directly and doing so fiercely. Once he started and got close, he would attack and attack until he was either put down or had put his opponent down. After getting a good assessment of his current abilities and power level, Ash developed a sensible approach in his head toward Rattata's training regimen and wasted no time implementing it. The first thing he did was attach one of the weighted body suits he had in abundance of onto the small rodent's body. He wanted to increase Rattata's speed, even though it was already quite impressive, and adding resistance was the way to go. After that, he began laying the groundwork for the Purple Rat's training routine. There were a couple key components of Rattata's physical abilities that he wanted to improve upon and also increase, both in the way of strengths and weaknesses. Presently, his strengths were definitely his speed, his ferocity and his durability. In his match against Pikachu, Rattata had been able to take quite a few hits before his body gave out. His weakness, on the other hand, was his small stature, which bigger Pokémon could easily take advantage of. To combat this, Ash knew that Rattata would need to be even faster to compensate for his lack of size. He would also have to be surprisingly more forceful and powerful when it came to his actual physical attacks. The second weakness he possessed was his overall stamina. While Rattata was a spirited fighter, his all-out approach to battling left him exhausted rather quickly. He would need to increase his stamina and also learn to become more calm in battle so he didn't waste so much energy needlessly. To achieve all of those ends, Ash made Rattata run from one end of the forested clearing they were training into the other, going as fast as he could for as long as possible. This was primarily for his endurance. From there, he made him practice climbing tree trunks and leaping from branch to hone his agility, speed and strength. Since climbing, especially while weighed down, took quite a bit of strength to accomplish, it was an ideal exercise. While in the trees, Ash made Rattata leap from tree to tree as well. That was designed to work the power and strength in his legs, as well as increase his jumping ability. Back down on the ground, Ash made use of several thick, fallen down logs in the nearby forest, as well as a few medium-sized rocks he found laying around. To this effect, he used such subjects to increase the power of Rattata's bite pressure. Starting first on the logs, he had the long-teethed rodent practice gnawing and biting upon the thick wooden surface as hard as he could. The trick was to try and pierce through or crunch in half, if possible, the logs using nothing but bite pressure. In a similar manner, Rattata used the rocks to pick up and bite down on in his mouth, though just hard enough to work on his jaw force, not break his teeth. Ash also had Rattata continuously tackle and throw himself into the trunk of a nearby large tree. The purpose of this was to toughen up his body, increase his overall striking force and build upon the power he was able to deliver in each physical attack. The Nidoran duo were very similar in many aspects to Rattata. They both loved battling and were quite good at it, though the fact they were small gave them a similar handicap. Fortunately, neither of them had the same tendency to lose control and go ballistic in a fight like Rattata, which was good news for Ash. Because of the similarities they shared with the long-fanged, purple-furred rat in terms of physicality, size and stature, he was able to simply transpose much of Rattata's training drills onto them. Quite literally, they did all the same kinds of routines as Rattata, right down to the body weight. They even did the same kind of bite force enhancement training on logs and rocks since, like Rattata, they too possessed incisors meant for biting and cutting. It was fair to say that, at the current moment, they and Pikachu followed a similar training regimen. Ash had them work on pushing their physical limitations, enhancing the power, accuracy and strength of their moves and improving upon their inherent type-based and individual weaknesses. Much like Pikachu, Spearow and Badoo, Ash also had Rattata and the Nidoran pair work on their moves, practice battling one another and exercise their weaknesses. And through the addition of his 3 newest Pokémon, he was able to add something new to Pikachu's routine as well. Since his first Pokémon could also use biting attacks, Ash had him join Rattata and the Nidoran pair in chomping and gnawing on the logs and rocks he had found. Which was humorous in certain respects since Pikachu had a small mouth and it took even smaller rocks to accommodate it. Lest his cheeks balloon out like a Pachirisu with a jaw full of nuts. Something else Ash found with the male and female Nidoran was that, during their practice battle with Pikachu, they worked quite well together. In fact, the two of them seemed to be quite strategic when it came to their fighting style. For example, when Pikachu was charging up a thunderbolt to hit the male ran at him from the side and then used his back feet to kick up dirt into the electric type's face, effectively cancelling out the attack. From there, the female had taken a running charge at Pikachu and managed to hit him with a full-body slam. That was just one example too of how the Nidoran pair battled together and watched each other's back all the time in combat. Which also apparently made clear to Ash that on the day he captured them, they hadn't really been fighting, only sparring together. With that knowledge, he immediately began processing how he could use their already established teamwork to better their training efforts. To that end, he had them do a lot of partner routines and sparring techniques together, as well as double fights against Pikachu and the other Pokémon to increase that teamwork. All in all, Ash did nothing more or less than assess his new Pokémon's strengths and weaknesses and then assigned them to training regimes that would assist in improving both attributes. For his growing Pokémon team, it was becoming a flourishing philosophy that nothing was ever good enough. If they had a particularly strong physical skill or ability, or if they did well at a given move, it could get better. If they had a weakness, due to type or personal shortcoming, it could always be improved upon and turned into a strength. In Ash's mind, more innovation, more work, more sweat and more pain was crucial to development. And not just for his Pokémon but for himself as well. For him, he could not, on good conscience, ask his Pokémon to do anything or push to any kind of extremes if he did not do the same himself. That was why he always worked out and did his own training the whole time they did their own. He wanted it to be fair and reciprocal. If he asked for everything they could give, he would give the same thing in return and share in their suffering. In that way, he knew that they would all bond closer and tighter together. In relatively short order since leaving home, Ash had already developed a generalized training routine for his Pokémon that even now, Pikachu and the rest of the team followed to the letter. Along with basic physical workouts to increase their bodily attributes, he wanted to systemically have them hit on each and every skill that could be honed and improved upon. Move training, combat practice, attack resistance damage, as well as strategy and planning for battle were all points of focus. Along with more reflective techniques like inner focusing, proper breathing, centering the mind and even meditative reflection. From sharpening their moves, finding new ways to use said moves, improving upon their physical conditioning through grueling and arduous training, and even working together to foster a sense of teamwork, all of these different areas Ash strove to develop. Obviously, doing everything he wanted to work on every day was simply not possible. It would take hours and exhaust all of them beyond any point that would be beneficial. Because of this, he knew that some days they would have to do different types of training and work their regimen around rotationally in order to touch on each base he wanted covered. After squaring Rattata and the Nidoran duo away, Ash took a few moments to watch them go at it. Rattata was in the middle of sprinting through the clearing as fast as he could while weighed down by the bodysuit he was wearing. And by the heavy panting and grunts of exertion coming from the small rodent, Ash knew it was effective. The male and female Nidoran were attempting to run up the side of two trees using nothing but speed and leg strength, which was made exceedingly difficult and exhaustive by the weights they were wearing as well. After jumping or falling down off the tree, they would then charge at both trees and throw themselves into the solid trunks as hard as possible. The force with which they did so was painful and bone-rattling, but it was one of the best ways to increase their power and resistance when it came to getting attacked themselves. On the other side of the clearing, Ash watched Budew practice hopping from one end of it to the other, as high and as fast as she could, before doing the same thing but at a sprint. She would then run at a tree and tackle it several times, just like both Nidoran, her metaphorical goal being to smash straight through the bark. She would then try to run up the side of the tree, again, just like Rattata and the others, but it was even harder for her. For one, she had no arms, only legs, with which to make the climb. Secondly, the bud on her head made her very top-heavy. And thirdly, she too was wearing body weight. After that, she drilled and trained hard on each of her moves, attempting to get everything out of each one that she possibly could. When she began to pant and wobble, Budew would refocus herself and go right back to it. Pikachu as well was hammering himself as hard as his little body could go. Currently, he was in the middle of pushing his speed as fast he could go in consecutive sprints across the clearing. Then, from end to the other, he would do the same thing, only this time while performing flips, jumps, spins and other evasive aerial acrobatics. He would also utilize a variety of different fighting and martial arts techniques in his back and forth sprints, such as jabbing, punching, kicking, tail swiping and other such fighting moves. On top of that, he also did the same type of drills that Rattata and the Nidoran duo were working on. Eventually, he ran over into his own corner of the clearing and started working on his electrical attacks. In this, he did everything he could think of, from modifying the size, strength, form and power of his electric attacks, to further improving upon his ability to use it at its utmost destructive, which was focused lightning. In that effort, Pikachu would continuously use attacks like Thunderbolt on the ground or on a rock, and he would do it over and over again. Each time he would pour as much power as he could possibly muster into every bolt of lightning. He would also focus on condensing the molecular structure of the electricity coming out of his body so that it would be like a steel hammer when it hit its target. In terms of density and force, exhaustive and draining, he would literally expend the electricity in his body until he was utterly drained and then collapse to the ground. It was brutal and it was hardcore, but if he was to turn his electric attacks into unstoppable forces of nature, it would take nothing but the utmost intensive of hard work and perseverance. Likewise, Spearow was pushing himself to the very quills of his feathers. Also adorned in his shiny silver body weight, he flew through the sky above as fast as his small wings could carry him, performing as many different complex, unique and skillful aerial acrobatics as possible while doing so. He then flew down into the trees themselves and made use of the natural terrain as flying obstacles. Between all the branches, underbrush and trees that were close together, it made flying a very tight and precise endeavor, which was perfect for increasing Spearow's agility, maneuverability, reaction time and dexterity. Afterward, he came back into the clearing and started flying into the trunk of some of the trees as hard as he could go without getting hurt. The purpose of this was to, of course, increase his resilience and durability, but also the hardness of his beak. He also made it a point to sharpen the talons on his feet and increase the power of moves like Fury Attack by clawing, kicking and scraping them against tree bark and rocks. The latter was much preferred since it almost served as an actual sharpener for Spearo's sharp talons. Lastly, he landed down on the ground and worked on improving his worst attribute, which was running, jumping and moving around on his legs instead of flying, like birds were naturally meant to do. It was made even harder whenever Pikachu would launch thunderbolts at him and Spearow had to dodge using nothing but legs and no wings at all. He had suffered many a nasty shock that way, but even still, the small bird was getting better and faster all the time. Of course, it wasn't that any of them were not used to suffering through painful attacks. One thing Ash was big on to really increase their overall resilience was having his Pokémon attack one another willingly. In this very unorthodox approach to training, Ash had one of his Pokémon stand still while one, or more, of the others took turns hitting them with a variety of attacks. They did this right up until the Pokémon in question was about to pass out, and then Ash stopped it and allowed whoever it was to rest, relax and recover from the trauma. He was no heartless trainer though. Ash underwent the same thing he asked of them to do. To date, he had been shocked, tackled, flown into, kicked, bitten and assaulted in many different ways by his Pokémon. And he did it all so that he could show his team that whatever he asked of them, he would suffer through the same in return. If they worked, he worked, and if they experienced pain, he would go through it right alongside them. It was hard getting them to do so at first, but once he assured them that he would be okay and explained why he wanted them to do it, they finally did. He couldn't ask his Pokémon to fight for him if he didn't know what kind of pain they experienced whenever they were hit with some kind of attack. They were not just a team or Pokémon and trainer, they were family. And family did everything together. They would share in all things as one, in happiness, sadness, pain and pleasure. And as the head of the family, Ash knew it was his job to be the example at all times. By the time training was finally done and they had all eaten lunch, Ash was simply relaxing back against a tree while Misty sat on a log next to him. Having just finished her own food, which had been a surprisingly pleasant meal of dried fruit and canned meat that Ash had doctored and spiced up, the orangutan was looking at the boy. He, at present, had Pikachu, Rattata, Badoo and the Nidoran duo sitting on his lap or around him. Spearow was roosting on his shoulder and, even though they all appeared tired like their trainer, they also looked to be the utmost content. "I've never seen anyone train so hard," she commented with an idle smile while stretching her legs out on the log. For a girl her age, she had quite the long and fit legs that were a pleasant sight to behold. Ash, being one who appreciated such things, even at his age, couldn't help but notice. Though he didn't stare. "Yeah well," he shrugged modestly while taking his eyes off the slightly older girl's legs. "We wanna be the best, you know. Can't do that if we don't train hard." He then looked at her. "So what about you, Misty? Why were you traveling by yourself? Just didn't have anyone to keep you company or something? You still never told me where you were from or what your last name is." At that, he could have sworn that Misty went a little rigid and became uncomfortable, but she just as quickly shook it off so as to confuse him. Instead, she smiled and completely avoided the question. "Well, on a more interesting note, Ash, how did you come to start training with Professor Oak anyway? You didn't tell me about that." Though he found it strange that she deliberately dodged his question, Ash nonetheless decided not to pry and instead went on to answer her question. After a short time of sitting and talking, they finally decided to move out again and got themselves ready before resuming their trek through the forest. Once Ash had returned his Pokémon, of course. The two of them wandered on through the thick forest terrain, staying close on the path all the while, and continued to converse casually among each other. However, after coming out into a somewhat more open stretch on the road ahead, Misty, not paying attention, suddenly bumped into Ash, whom had stopped without any warning. "Oomph," she grunted while walking straight into his backpack. "Hey, why did you stop, Ash?" He simply remained silent and, instead of answering, pointed ahead. She looked to where he was pointing, and there, the confused young girl saw a Pidgey pecking at the ground as it searched for food. Misty glanced back at her companion afterwards and then asked, "What is it?" The boy finally replied, albeit quietly. This is actually the first time I've seen a Pidgey up close in the wild since I left Pallet Town. I don't know why, but they've been scarce for some reason. Could be due to breeding patterns or something, I don't know. All I do know is that anytime I see a new Pokémon I don't have, I wanna catch it. And Pidgey is no exception. The orange-haired girl still seemed relatively confused. Ash, I hate to say it, but Pidgey are very common Pokémon and they're not even all that strong, to be honest. Don't you think it's kind of a waste? He shook his head in the negative. Every Pokémon has the potential to be great, Misty. They just need a certain kind of trainer to bring it out in them. Plus, Pidgey eventually evolve into Pidgeot. Not only are those Pokémon strong, but with the right training, they can also be incredibly fast. I have a Spearow right now, so if I get this Pidgey and then later manage to get it and Spearow to evolve, I'll have 2 strong flying-type Pokémon on my team. The water-type enthusiast seemed impressed by his foresight and just nodded in understanding. Finally, Ash stepped forward and narrowed his gaze at the wild Pidgey. He then drew a Pokeball and threw it while announcing, Spearow. Show us how strong you've become. The tiny bird Pokémon quickly emerged from the ball with a loud cry of, row. While taking to the air, Pidgey noticed its unexpected company at that time and turned to face them. Which impressed Ash since, normally, members of that same species would flee whenever faced with danger. Get ready, Spearow, he yelled up to his Pokémon, which Spearow nodded to before facing his opponent and hovering in midair. As soon as the 2 small birds locked eyes with one another, sparks immediately flew and they stared hard at each other. Ready to take action, Ash soon began. Spearow, use agility followed by peck on Pidgey. His first flying type disappeared in a flash of speed and reappeared a second later, hitting Pidgey hard with the thick beak on his face and sending it skidding back a little across the ground. However, the other bird quickly recovered and then took to the air itself, flying at Spearow with impressive speed. Spearow fly to the side and then use Fury Attack. Came Ash's counter swiftly. Spearow flew out of the way of the other attacking bird and then moved back in close and started striking his opponent with a vicious Fury Attack of wings and beak. Pidgey cried out in pain as it was hit one last time by Spearow's wing and went soaring back into a tree. Falling to the ground, it let out a cry of, Pidgey, and lay with wings sprawled out flat on either side. Ash knew that Pidgey stood no chance against his trained Spearow, but he still had to commend it for its heart. Especially once the determined little bird got back up onto its feet and began wobbly rising into the air again. Spearow. He raised his hand and pointed. Run on the ground toward Pidgey and then jump into the air and hit it with an aerial ace. The little multicolored bird quickly took off on his 2 legs, much faster than a flying type should have been able to. Spearow had been training to run on his feet and not merely fly through the air, which meant now, he had a trump card up his wing. Many did not. He closed in on Pidgey rapidly and then jumped into the air when he was just below Pidgey. The speed and force with which he did so allowed him to twist into an aerial ace, thereby hitting his feathered kindred and sending it flying back into another tree. Pidgey fell limply to the ground, unconscious, while Spearow flew back to Ash's side. The young man swiftly drew an empty Pokeball from his belt and then threw it at Pidgey. The red and white ball made perfect contact and sucked the Pokémon inside, wobbling a few times on the ground before going still and expelling a burst of stars to signify a successful capture. After thanking Spearow, Ash returned him and then went over to pick up the Pokeball that now held Pidgey. The button on the front of the ball was glowing red, however, which meant that he needed to either let it go to Professor Oaks or switch out another Pokémon to keep Pidgey. He ended up deciding to transfer the male Nidoran via his Pokédex in order to keep Pidgey with him and train his newest capture. Soon afterward, he let Pidgey out of the ball and started healing its battle wounds with his usual post-capture medical routine, which comprised of a potion of one of the 4 different kinds, as well as an Oron berry. After he healed the small bird of its wounds and Pidgey began eating the berry, Ash scanned it with the Pokédex. Pokédex entry number 016. Pidgey, the tiny bird Pokémon. Pidgey has an extremely sharp sense of direction. It is capable of unerringly returning home to its nest, however far it may be removed from its familiar surroundings. Very docile, and if attacked, it will often kick up sand to protect itself rather than fight back. This Pidgey is female and has the abilities: Keen Eye, Tangled Feet and Big Pecs. This Pokémon knows the moves: Tackle, Gust, Quick Attack and Whirlwind. Ash put his Pokédex away once he was finished, and then, after both he and Pikachu spent a few minutes welcoming Pidgey to the team, he returned the small Pokémon and set off yet again. Misty by his side and Pikachu on his shoulder. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX large tree he was currently climbing. "I'm fine," he shouted back while straddling a branch with most of his body, nearly halfway up the tree. One hand was over his eyes as he scanned the forest floor far below. Pikachu was doing the same next to him. "Well, what are you doing?" She repeated her unanswered question with hands on her hips. "I'm looking for new Pokémon." The intently searching young man looked as far into the distance as he could, but, seeing nothing, he nonetheless continued to scan. "I know there has to be some. I heard there's a lot of bug types in this forest." Misty gave a shiver and grabbed her arms. "Why, yeah, well, I hope not. Just come down so we can go. I wanna get out of this forest." Finally, he looked down her way and blinked. "What's wrong, Misty? You sound upset." The orangutan looked away for a minute and then sighed before calling back up to him. "I don't like bug types, okay? They creep me out." Sitting up on the branch he was straddling, the messy-haired boy processed what he had just been told before smiling. "Well, Misty, you shoulda told me that earlier, sorry. We'll come down now and get out of here as soon as we can." He then looked at his little yellow starter and nodded. "Come on, bud, let's go down." With Pikachu hopping back onto his shoulder, Ash began his climb down the big tree, but since the branches were so thick and full, the progress was a little slower down than up. However, he was only in the climb for a minute, at the most, before he heard a loud scream, and since it was only the two of them, he knew the source came from his female companion. Misty. Fearing for her safety, Ash began a rapid climb down the tree, half tumbling and half falling all the way. When he finally made it to the bottom a short time later, the worried young trainer hopped to the ground while he was still almost 4 feet from the bottom and landed in a crouch with a grunt. Looking up quickly, expecting to see his female friend in mortal peril, Ash's expression, as well as Pikachu's, changed to reflect the confusion they were feeling. The reason for that perplexity was due to Misty, whom was now hanging upside down from a nearby tree branch with her body wrapped around it like a slakoth. Her face was frozen into an expression of disgust and terror while she trembled violently and stared at something down on the ground. "Eek. No. No, get it away. Get it away. Get it away." Standing up, the confused young man looked at his panicking friend and held his arms out. "Misty, what the heck is wrong with you? I almost broke my neck clambering down out of that tree when I heard you scream." Reaching one hand out, she pointed to a spot on the ground a few feet away and squealed. "There. Right there. It's one of those creepy, nasty, crawly bugs." Following her finger's direction, Ash finally saw what had sent her into such a frenzy. There, sitting as harmlessly as could be, was a small green caterpillar that he immediately recognized. "Hey, it's a Caterpie." A bright smile lit up the boy's face as he spotted the small bug type that was only a short distance away from the tree Misty was now inhabiting. "This is great, thanks, Misty." The athletic young girl snapped her head back and looked at him like he had just sprouted the wings of a gligar. "Great. No, it's not great. I told you I hate bugs, now get rid of it." Smirking, he reached up to his belt and unclipped a Pokeball. "Don't worry, Misty, I'll handle this." He then enlarged and the through ball, which snapped open and released Rattata from within. "All right, Rattata, time for your first battle. Let's catch that Caterpie." The small purple rat hit a fighting crouch and growled just as his trainer yelled, "Use quick attack." With a loud cry of, "Ratta!" the small rat bounded forward in a blur of white and came upon the small caterpillar before it knew what was coming. In a dead aim, Rattata slammed into Caterpie and sent it tumbling back across the ground. To Ash's surprise though, the green worm quickly recovered and got back up. Then, with a cry of, "Aye!" it leapt at Rattata using Tackle. He quickly jumped to the side and avoided the attack and then ran at Caterpie to use his own Tackle. Demonstrating impressive evasive ability though, the first stage form of Butterfree leapt off of its back tail and sprung away from the attack. Before Ash could give Rattata a command, Caterpie shot a thick and gooey rope of webbing from its mouth that landed straight on the normal type's face and blinded him. Reeling back and now completely blind, Rattata shook his head rapidly from side to side but was unable to get the sticky webbing of string shot off of his eyes. Just then, Caterpie went into action and jumped at him, tackling Rattata hard and sending him sliding back along the grass. Seeing the situation his Pokémon was in, Ash called out, "Rattata, don't forget you have claws. Use them to get that webbing off your face." Just when Caterpie was about to attack again, Rattata reached up with his right paw and used the claws on it to shred through the insect thread stuck to his face. Luckily, just when Caterpie was about to use Tackle again, Rattata managed to get the webbing off his face and saw the attack with seconds to spare. In a fortunate turn of events, he jumped to the side and avoided any future damage. Good, now use Quick Attack and Bite to toss Caterpie. Ash's instruction was followed by his Pokémon charging at Caterpie in another burst of speed and ramming himself into the worm head-on. From there, Rattata clamped down it with his strong teeth and then whipped his back, tossing Caterpie into the nearest tree. This time, when the small caterpillar fell to the ground after the rapid two-strike attack, it lay where it was and struggled to get back up. Seeing his chance, Ash pulled an empty Pokeball from his side and enlarged it before reeling back and then tossing it with a strong throw. The ball quickly struck its target and opened before sucking Caterpie inside. After hitting the ground, it only rolled around a few times before going still and letting forth its starburst. Seeing their efforts successful, Ash smiled satisfactorily and hurried up to grab it. "All right." Turning to Rattata and Pikachu, he held the ball out and I smiled. "We got ourselves a Caterpie, you two." The two rodent Pokémon cheered the addition of their newest teammate while he looked at Misty and showed her the Pokeball. "You can come down now, Misty, we caught it." Still hanging upside down off the branch, she shivered and made a disgusted snorting sound with her nose. "Oh great, now we'll have a nasty bug with us while we're traveling around. Yuck." She no more than finished speaking those words when she suddenly felt something soft and wriggly on her leg. Looking up onto the branch she was hanging from, the young girl saw, to her dread, another bug crawling on her leg. This one however was a light tannish brown with a big horn on its head. For several long moments she simply stared at the bug crawling on her leg before, finally, her eyes widened, her hair stood on end and a loud scream erupted from her throat. Eek! Before he knew what was happening, Ash saw Misty practically flying from the tree and somehow hiding behind him for shelter without his notice. In the uproar, she had also kicked the bug off her leg and it was now laying on the ground beneath the tree. "Oh Arceus! Yuck, it's another bug. Another creepy, crawly, slimy bug. This place is so totally disgusting." While she panicked and cursed behind him, Ash looked at the Pokémon she had just kicked off her leg and recognized it without hesitation. "Hey awesome!" Hands balling up excitedly at his face, Ash's eyes practically shone. "It's a Weedle. Man, what's the luck of finding it in the exact same place as Caterpie?" "Luck! Luck!" Misty screamed indignantly behind him. "If it's any kind of luck then it's bad luck. These nasty bugs keep finding me and it's horrible. I oughta eat." Smirking, he looked down at Rattata and raised a fist. "Well, I say it's good luck and we're gonna catch it. Right, Rattata?" The big-fanged Pokémon nodded and bounded forward again, ready for battle. Rattata. Okay. Ash narrowed his eyes at the second bug type. "We have to be careful here, Rattata. Weedle can use poison-type moves from that stinger on its head. We're gonna have to battle smart. Start running around it using Quick Attack but don't make contact." Rattata did so and, utilizing his speed, he started running in wide circles around Weedle. The toxic bug watched the small rodent sprint in fast circles around it for a few seconds until its patience finally reached an end. Narrowing its eyes, Weedle attempted to lock onto Rattata and then, lowering its head, it fired a burst of glowing needles at him. Fortunately, Rattata was fast and the poisonous worm's aim was way off, thus sparing him of a nasty hit. Still, Rattata continued to charge in circles around Weedle, first appearing in one place and then in another. Becoming a mixture of both angry and anxious, the pre-evolved form of Kakuna started using rapid poison stings at every blur that it thought was Rattata. Every single hail of poisonous needles ended up being for naught, however, since the normal-type rat was too fast to be hit. Finally, seeing Weedle getting confused by all the running, Ash yelled, "Now, hit it, Rattata!" Coming in from a leftward angle Weedle didn't expect, Rattata tackled it and sent the small worm flying. Although, to both of their surprise, Weedle shot a string of webbing from its mouth, just like Caterpie, only it attached it to a tree branch. While still airborne, the horned caterpillar used the stringy rope to fly across the small roadside area and up onto the branch its string was attached to. Then, with itself now poised at higher elevation, Weedle lunged down at Rattata, horn first. Not panicking, Ash watched the attack incoming and narrowed his eyes. "Rattata, hold. Don't move yet, don't move." The obedient rodent did as he was told and didn't move. He simply stayed where he was and looked up at Weedle as it came hurtling down toward him. At last, when time was almost up, Ash shouted, "Now Rattata, jump away." Cutting it close, the purple rat sprung away just before Weedle reached it. However, instead of hitting its target, the toxic bug type ended up sticking itself horn first into the ground. Now effectively stuck and unable to move, Weedle presented itself as an ideal target, which gave Rattata and Ash all the time they needed to execute the next move. "Great. Now use tackle and end this." On Ash's command, Rattata charged ahead and jumped, slamming himself into Weedle while the trapped bug type continued struggling to get free. Unable to defend itself, Weedle was swiftly dislodged from the ground and went spinning through the air before landing on the grass with a hard thud. Seeing the swirls in its eyes, Ash smiled triumphantly and pulled out another Pokeball. "Here we go. Weedle, you're mine." With that, he tossed the ball and, much like with Caterpie, it struck its target and sucked Weedle inside. From there, the Pokeball landed back on the ground and shook a few times before completing the capture. Giving a shout of victory, the young man ran over and picked up the ball. "Yes, we got a Weedle." He then looked at Pikachu and Rattata on the ground and smiled again. "Our team just keeps getting bigger." Kneeling down, he reached out and started petting Rattata as he and Pikachu ran to him. "Thanks Rattata, those were both some really great battles. Thank you for helping me catch Caterpie and Weedle." Rattata smiled up at his trainer and vocalized his happy reply before Ash looked at the ball in his hand and saw that the button was now glowing. He reached to his side where he had placed Caterpie's Pokeball and, taking it out, found that it too was doing the same. I suppose I need to decide who to switch out now." Since he had more than 6 Pokémon with both new captures, the boy quickly placed the balls onto the grass and then pulled out his Pokédex. "I need to make my selection pretty quick before the transfer hold ends." He spoke those words thoughtfully to himself while thinking over who he wanted to send back to the lab. Luckily, newly captured Pokémon that exceeded the carry limit usually had a several-minute window before they were beamed away to wherever the trainer in question had them set up to go. Which, in Ash's case, was of course Professor Oak's. The transfer hold was designed to give the trainer time to consider if they wanted to keep their newly captured Pokémon with them or not. And if they did, it also gave them time to decide which Pokémon went and which one stayed. Wanting to keep Caterpie and Weedle with him so he could get to know them, like with Pidgey, Ash soon decided on sending back his female Nidoran and Spearow. After that was done, he put his Pokédex away and returned Rattata before looking back at Misty, whom was still visibly nervous. "Would you calm down, Misty? I caught them both, they're not gonna crawl on you anymore." She shuddered for what seemed the dozenth time and pointed. "Yeah, but I know what you're about to do. You're gonna let them both out and scan them with your Pokédex." He nodded his head back and forth. Well, yeah, I kinda have too. So. She backed up quickly until she was almost on the other side of the woody area that the road cut through. Fine. But I'm staying here until you're done. Rolling his eyes in amusement, Ash held out both balls and released Caterpie and Weedle from inside. Afterward, he knelt down and kindly introduced himself. Pikachu did likewise, and after reassuring both small bug types that he meant no harm, Ash took off his backpack and started to heal them of their battle injuries. When he was finally finished a short time later and the two kindred but different caterpillar Pokémon were eating the Oran berries he offered them, Ash sat back and smiled. Due to him giving them gentle medical treatment and food after that, he could tell Caterpie and Weedle had relaxed around him and were no longer nervous or afraid. Of course, when they finished their berries and Pikachu went up to start making animated conversation with them, the boy knew he had his first Pokémon to partially thank for that. Pikachu was very friendly and he had an innate ability to talk and make friends with other Pokémon shortly after meeting them. It was this that Ash had a lot to owe him for. He knew Pikachu helped talk him up to his new Pokémon and therefore, it aided him in gaining their trust and acceptance a lot quicker than usual. It always did good, after all, to have another Pokémon vouch for you, and in that way, as well as many others, he was very grateful to Pikachu. While the three small Pokémon conversed, Ash pulled his Pokédex out again and scanned Caterpie first. It only took a few moments, and once it was done, Dexter began reading out the gathered information. Pokédex entry number 010. Caterpie, the worm Pokémon. For protection, it releases a horrible stench from the antenna on its head to drive away enemies. Its short feet are tipped with suction pads that enable it to tirelessly climb slopes and walls. This Caterpie is male and has the ability Shield Dust. This Pokémon knows the moves Tackle, String Shot and Bug Bite. After scanning Caterpie, Ash took a moment to lament the fact that the Pokédex opted to not mention that touching the feeler on top of Caterpie's head could also cause it to release its stinky pheromone. One more good thing he had to chalk up to being Professor Oak's pupil. Seeing Pikachu and both worms now in the midst of involved conversation, he smiled to himself before scanning Weedle. Soon, he had its information as well. Pokédex entry number 013. Weedle, the hairy bug Pokémon. Weedle has an extremely acute sense of smell. It is capable of distinguishing its favorite kinds of leaves from those it dislikes just by sniffing with its big red proboscis. Beware of the sharp stinger on its head. It hides in grass and bushes where it eats leaves. This Weedle is male and has the ability Shield Dust. This Pokémon knows the moves Poison Sting, String Shot and Bug Bite. Putting his Pokédex away once he was done, and feeling more than a little surprised that they both knew a move as rare as Bug Bite, Ash looked at Weedle and Caterpie and got their attention. So, how do you two feel coming along with me and getting stronger? He smiled in amusement. I guess Pikachu's told you already what we're doing. The two insect Pokémon looked at each other and then back at him before smiling and giving an enthusiastic chorus of sounds that he took as a yes. Especially once they both crawled over to him and then climbed up his legs, across his torso and onto his arms. For Ash though, the feel of the prickly hair that was on the bottom of their feet tickled and caused him to laugh. Ha ha. Okay, I guess that's a yes then. Ha 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 ha. Oh man, that tickles. While both of the bug-type caterpillars rubbed themselves against their new trainer and he laughed at the tickling sensation, Misty visibly shivered and slowly walked toward him. So, you're keeping these two, with us? The tan-skinned young trainer looked back at the green-eyed girl and nodded. Well yeah, of course I am. I gotta train them and get to know them, how else would we bond? Her left eye twitched and she gave a half-nervous, half-unnerved smile along with a trepidatious laugh. Hee hee, yeah, great, that's really great. Turning to her fully, Ash gestured at the two bug types on his arms. Hey, why don't you come say hi, Misty? They won't bite. Another shiver overcame the young girl as she rapidly shook her hands out in front of her. No, that's okay, that's alright. You just keep them with you, Ash, and I'll admire them from afar. Suppressing a chuckle of amusement at his friend, he shrugged and held up a hand. Suit yourself, but I think you're missing out. They're really friendly." As if on cue, Caterpie and Weedle looked at the girl and voiced at the same time. Weedle. AA. If Ash ever doubted whether someone could actually change color from fear or disgust, he would never question it again after watching Misty turn bright purple and then rush on to get ahead of them. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX he looked at Pidgey, Weedle and Caterpie, whom had their faces buried into their special-made Pokémon food next to Pikachu, Badoo and Rattata. "Yeah, well, these sandwiches you made are really good too," Ash replied with a smile as he bit into the sandwich Misty had made the two of them. "Aw, thank you, Ash." She smiled at him and looked down at the one in her hand. "They're just cheese, lettuce, tomato and sour pickle. I learned how to make it when I was little, but I think it's kind of an acquired taste." He shrugged and took another bite. "Well, I like it." Looking at the three aforementioned Pokémon, he commented further. "I take time crafting a unique recipe for each of my Pokémon. I just caught these three, so it might take a while. I'm still experimenting with the others too." Having found yet another clearing in the forest where they decided to stop for another food break, Ash also took the opportunity presented to work on making training routines for Pidgey, Weedle and Caterpie. The former two, while spirited, were going to need a lot of work. It wasn't so much because they were unskilled as to the fact that they were very small and weak as a species. As a general rule of thumb, Pokémon like Weedle and Caterpie were typically never considered to be very strong. Most of the time, trainers caught them just to evolve them as quickly as possible into their final two forms, Beedrill and Butterfree. While Ash knew they would evolve quickly, he still wanted to train and make them as strong as he could beforehand while in their first stages. To do this, he resorted again to putting body weights on Weedle and Caterpie and had them do a variety of different drills. For starters, he had them crawl from one end of the clearing to the other as fast as they could go, before doing the same but while pushing rocks to build their strength. They also climbed up trees wearing weights, only without the rocks. On top of that, he also had them work on the few moves they knew, spar together and work on the variety of different ways they could use and weaponize String Shot, which his earlier battle before catching Caterpie and Weedle had given him the idea for. String Shot was a very underrated move, but if used the right way, it could be very effective and disarming in battle. It could be used to mess opponents up or confuse them, as when Caterpie shot webbing into Rattata's eyes. It could also be used to trap them, make strategic formations in battle and even take advantage of the surrounding terrain. Aside from that, he also had Weedle and Caterpie practice battle against Pikachu, Badoo and Rattata, as well as endure attacks from their teammates for as long as they could, to build pain resistance and endurance. Their training was rather straightforward, but, in Ash's mind, it was the best way to strengthen both worms until they finally evolved into their respective cocoon stages, which would also make those forms even stronger. Concerning Pidgey, it had been quite easy deciding upon a training regimen for her. Since she was about the same size as Spearow, she also had many of the same needs, and thus, he was able to mostly transpose Spearow's training onto hers. Surprisingly though, she had more endurance than Spearow, and it showed in her ability to do her flying exercises and other training drills longer, while weighted down, than the male bird. Something that also surprised Ash was just how fast and agile she was. He knew that Pidgey and its evolutionary line was fast, but the speed and lithe agility with which she demonstrated it was truly amazing. In fact, incredibly enough, in only 1 hour of training, she had somehow managed to learn a brand new move in agility. While flying through the trees around their clearing and using them as obstacles to improve upon her evasiveness, speed and agility, he noticed Pidgey suddenly glow before disappearing and reappearing at a rapid pace. It was then he knew that she had learned agility. "You know, Misty, you have some nice looking Pokémon." Coming out of his contemplation of the recent training foray for his newest Pokémon, Ash turned to Misty again and smiled. "You really do." Being the first time he got to see all her Pokémon, Ash now knew she had Staryu, a Starmie and a Goldeen, each of them looking quite healthy and well taken care of. "Thanks," she replied while smiling in return. "I try to take good care of them." After all, water types are my specialty. Once their snack was finished and they packed up, the two companions returned their Pokémon and then prepared to set out on the last leg of their journey through the forest. Right when they were about to leave the clearing and make their way to the road again though, a loud rustling from the bushes nearby caught their attention. Just as Ash turned to the sound to find its source however, a flurry of movement and fast action erupted from the foliage. To their shock and bafflement, the one who burst forth from the bushes was not a Pokémon but a boy. And not just any boy but one who was dressed in what seemed to be the multicolored armored garb of a samurai. Moreover, the boy was currently in the midst of bringing a sharp-looking katana blade down on Ash with a loud cry of, "Kya!" With all of his years training under Machamp, Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, Ash's instincts were sharp. Just as Pikachu leapt from his shoulder, he jumped and rolled to the side right as the samurai boy brought his sword down onto the ground where Ash had just been standing. The fast young Ketchum then slid right under the strange boy and kicked him in the stomach hard, driving the wind out of him with a loud, oomph, and causing him to bend forward. Pikachu's trainer quickly took advantage of their enemy's stunned state and reached up with his leg to kick the other boy's wrists, which made his sword fly out of his hands and up into the air. Ash then immediately whipped his legs around on the ground in an arc and locked the attacker's legs up with his, bringing the boy down to the grass. Ash kicked up right after that and grabbed the falling sword by the hilt just as it was about to hit the ground. Turning around swiftly, he pinned the strangely dressed stranger to the ground with a foot on his chest and the boy's own katana pointed at his neck. "You have 5 seconds to start explaining," Ash informed with a cold edge to his tone. The boy, realizing his dangerous predicament, spoke quickly. "I am sorry for attacking you. My name is Jack Samurai and I was only endeavoring to get your attention." Ash stepped back from the boy and allowed him to stand up after a few seconds of deliberation. "That was a real stupid way to get someone's attention, you know." Misty spoke up then and she was beyond furious. "Yeah, what did you think you were doing? Swinging a sword around like that? You could have really hurt Ash or killed him." The young man with the surname of Samurai merely bowed his head low. "Forgive me, both of you. I was only wishing to know if the whom I attacked came from the town known as Pallet. I did not mean any ill will towards either of you, nor would I have really done you any harm. It is my way of testing those whom I first meet." Ash sized the other boy up and finally got a good look at how he was dressed. The armor he was wearing consisted of nothing more than a metal dew, which was colored red at the top and black on the bottom with a yellow strip separating the two. He had a white sash wrapped around his waist and it separated the breastplate part of the dew from the section which covered his pelvis. That part was blue with yellow strips at the bottom. He wore a kabuto on his head that was black and gold with the horns at the front being the latter color. On his feet he wore simple wooden geta and strapped to his back was a large bug-catching net. Underneath his armor he seemed to be wearing a white tank top and green shorts. Eventually, Ash held the boy's katana out and spoke. "If you wanted to know where I was from, all you had to do was ask and I would have gladly told you. You didn't have to attack me." Samurai bowed lower. "I know and I am sorry. I accept that I may have been a bit too overzealous. You must forgive me, I come from a long line of family that has trained in the noble and ancient art of the samurai for many generations." He then accepted his blade back and returned it fluidly to its sheath. "When I decided to leave home and become a bug Pokémon trainer, I swore to my family that I would continue to uphold our tradition." The young man looked at Ash and then Misty. "I apologize for scaring you, though I must admit, I have not before received such a spirited and overwhelming response to my methods from any other trainer I have met in this forest. Not even from the other 3 individuals who hailed from the town of Pallet." Misty, who had calmed herself finally, blinked and asked, "Why would you have wanted to know if Ash was from Pallet Town?" The boy looked at her and then smiled in fond remembrance. "Ah yes. Over the last 2.5 weeks 3 different trainers passed through this forest and when I met them, I challenged them each to a Pokémon battle." He closed his eyes and tilted his head up. "Even though I was defeated all 3 times, I resolved to train and become stronger." He put a hand to his chin. The last one I met made passing comment of another young trainer that had received their own first Pokémon on the same day as themselves. Though he did not seem to think highly of this person and questioned whether they would make it here at all. Opening his eyes, he looked at Misty and Ash again. Regardless, I decided that I would redouble my training in preparation for the arrival of that fourth trainer if they did come. Understanding now, Ash smiled while Pikachu jumped back up onto his shoulder. Yeah, you're talking about Gary and the other two kids, sounds about right. So you were waiting for me and that's why you asked where I was from. Samurai nodded. Indeed, and now I must humbly ask, will you please forgive me and accept my challenge? Ash smiled at the young man's words. Yeah, I forgive you, Samurai, just don't go doing something stupid like that again. And yes, I accept your challenge. Samurai smiled as well and bowed. Agreed, and thank you for your forgiveness. Now let us battle. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Misty was near the middle of the field acting as referee. She called out loudly so both trainers could hear her, "This will be a 2-on-2 Pokémon battle between Ash Ketchum of Pallet Town and Jack Samurai. Trainers, choose your Pokémon." Samurai started off the battle as he threw his chosen Pokeball with a shout of, "Metapod, I choose you." From within the ball in question, the green cocoon-shaped Pokémon appeared in a flash of light and droned aloud, "Metapod." Seeing their opponent, Ash thought for a few seconds on who he would use and then decided. "Caterpie, let's go." Appearing on the grassy field quickly from its ball, the pre-evolved form of Butterfree screeched loudly, "A! A!" Wanting to get the momentum going in their favor, the trainer from Pallet started things off. "Caterpie, use Tackle on Metapod." Caterpie took off to hit their opponent but Samurai moved to counter. "Metapod, use Harden." The sturdy cocoon stayed still as its shell glowed and hardened, becoming stronger and more resilient. Due to this, Caterpie hit Metapod's shell and bounced off. At that, Samurai shouted another command. "It is useless, your Caterpie will never get through our defense. Now Metapod use Tackle." Metapod suddenly launched itself at Caterpie but Ash was fast to react. Caterpie dodged it and then used Bug Bite. The small green caterpillar jumped out of the way and then lunged at Metapod to deliver the attack his trainer had ordered. However, Samurai was ready once more. Metapod hardened again. The hard-shelled Pokémon glowed green again and was given a further layer of protection from Caterpie's Bug Bite just before it hit. The attack once more failed and Caterpie quickly returned back to Ash. Seeing the impasse they had reached, Samurai called out, "Your Caterpie cannot possibly win. My Metapod's shell is impenetrable. Your Pokémon's attacks will all fail, meanwhile my Metapod can still use Tackle. Your Caterpie simply is not strong enough to get past our defenses." Ash only smirked in reply. "Let's just see about that." Caterpie used String Shot and cover Metapod's face up. Squealing his name loudly, Caterpie reared back and then shot a thick, sticky goop of String Shot out of his mouth that hit and completely covered Metapod's face, effectively blinding it. Samurai appeared confused. "Why would you do something like that? String Shot will not hurt my Metapod. I do not even need to have it use Harden to defend against that attack. You are nothing more than a novice compared to the other 3 trainers from Pallet." Ash continued to smirk. "We'll see. You know Samurai, you made a big mistake." The other boy blinked. "What do you mean?" The messy-haired trainer explained while pointing. "For not having your Metapod dodge that String Shot." Samurai still appeared perplexed, as did Misty. The young Ketchum continued without missing a step. "That String Shot I had Caterpie use has completely covered your Metapod's face. True, we may not have been able to break through Metapod's defenses but we can take away your Pokémon's ability to breath." Everyone but him looked shocked at what he just said and Samurai voiced it with a tremble in his voice. What do you mean?" Ash simply pointed toward Metapod again, who was now rolling around the ground in a panic. "Metapod!" The armored young boy shouted in concern as he saw his Pokémon's state before looking to his opponent again. "What did you do to him?" The calmer of the two plainly responded. String shot covered your Pokemon's nose, blocking off its airway. Metapod can't breathe, and since it has no appendages to peel off the string shot with, it's beginning to suffocate. Quote. Hearing this, Samurai immediately ran out onto the field and quickly knelt down to start pulling the sticky substance off of his Pokemon's face. Once he was done, he took one look at the traumatized bug type in his arms and knew from the exhaustion it was reflecting that the battle was over. Gritting his teeth but accepting the defeat, he thanked his Pokémon and then returned Metapod before walking back over to his side of the field. Once there, he turned and faced Ash again. Clever, quite clever. He then pulled out his last Pokeball. Pinsir, go. As soon as the vicious-looking, horned beetle appeared on the field, Ash thought for just a few moments and then made his next choice. Caterpie, good job, return. He then reached for his next Pokeball and enlarged it after returning the small caterpillar. Pidgey, come on out. The tiny bird Pokemon appeared from her Pokeball with a series of loud chirps. Pidgey. Samurai started the second round off this time around. Pinsir, use tackle. Ash, though, was quick to react. Pidgey, fly into the air now. The small bird bided her time and then flew up high into the air, allowing Pinsir to pass under her. On the heels of that, he called for another command. Now use Gust. Pidgey opened her wings out wide and then started flapping them vigorously, creating a strong gale of wind that headed for Pinsir. Samurai countered quickly though, yelling with urgency. Pinsir, root yourself. The bug-type Pokemon stood its ground and managed to withstand the fast and strong whirlwind. What neither Samurai nor Pinsir was expecting, however, was for Pidgey to come flying out of the dust cloud churned up by Gust and smash into Pinsir hard, knocking it to the ground. Seeing this, the bug's trainer gritted his teeth and waited for his Pokemon to get up before yelling. Pinsir, use Vice Grip. As the now angry and much bigger insect began charging towards Pidgey, Ash smirked. Pidgey, use agility to get around that attack and then start circling around Pinsir as fast as you can. Reacting fluidly, she dodged the attack and started spinning around her opponent so fast that no one could keep up. Now use Quick Attack, her new trainer commanded swiftly. Pidgey came out of her circle and sped toward Pinsir like a high-velocity dart. With no resistance, she hit the bug hard in the stomach, which lifted it up off of its feet and sent it soaring back at Samurai. Unable to break its fall, Pinsir hit the ground heavily and then slowly got back to its feet, breathing labored all the while. The bug-type's trainer knew they were in trouble. Pinsir, start charging at Pidgey and then try your Vice Grip again. The stag beetle Pokemon did as commanded and ran at Pidgey again, albeit much slower than before. Ash was going to have her stand her ground and then duck and fly under Pinsir, the strategy being to come up and hit from behind with another gust. However, just as the large bug was about to make contact, Samurai shouted. Pinsir, use Thrash. The thick-skinned bug type hissed and its eyes appeared to gleam with a fierce, angry spark entering them. This in turn caused it to chatter menacingly as its temper reached the boiling point. When it finally reached Pidgey, Pinsir caught her unawares and, utilizing its increase in power and speed, began pummeling her. After a lasting period of brutal strikes that came from its arms and horns, one final smack from Pinsir's right horn sent her flying to the ground and landing roughly in front of Ash, now badly beaten up and bruised. For his part though, the boy remained calm. He knew panicking would gain them nothing. Pidgey, I know you got this. Get up and show them your true strength. Dig deeper, girl, dig deeper. The small bird struggled and fought against her injuries and slowly managed to get back up, bellowing to the sky when she finally made it back to her feet. Pidgey, why? At that very same moment, she started to glow in a bright white light and then began changing before everyone's eyes. As the light grew stronger, Pidgey's entire body grew and morphed in shape and size until, once it was over, in her place stood a larger bird with a considerably larger wingspan. She also now had bright, colorful plumage atop her head and even her tail feathers were brightly colored. Once the light faded away to reveal her changed form, the newly evolved Pokémon lifted her head up and gave a noticeably deeper caw. Pidgey, oh ooh. Blinking in surprise that rapidly gave way to joy, Ash smiled widely and then pulled his Pokédex out, which he pointed at his first evolved Pokémon. Soon after scanning her, Dexter spoke. Pokédex entry number 017. Pidgeotto, the bird Pokémon. Pidgeotto claims a large area as its own territory. This Pokémon flies around, patrolling its living space. If its territory is violated, it shows no mercy in thoroughly punishing the foe with its sharp claws. This Pokémon now knows the moves: Tackle, Quick Attack, Gust, Whirlwind, Agility and Twister. After receiving her information, the boy looked back up at Pidgeotto and nodded at her, still smiling ear to ear. She nodded back, as if silently communicating that his motivation had pushed her to evolve. Samurai, meanwhile, was standing in awe, staring with disbelief at what had just happened along with Misty and Pikachu. Ash, re-energized, pointed at Pinsir and yelled, "Pidgeotto, use Agility followed by Quick Attack. From there, hit it with your new attack, Twister." Samurai couldn't even utter a command as Pidgeotto began her assault. She disappeared in a blur of speed and then reappeared just in time to smash into the still thrashing Pinsir with Quick Attack, kneeling the bug to the ground instantly and ending its tirade. She then disappeared and reappeared yet again behind the stunned Pokémon and flapped her wings powerfully. This action caused her to whip up a powerful and dark funnel of violently spinning wind that pulled Pinsir off the ground and into its vortex in mere seconds. From there, the loud and churning Twister swirled the large bug around dozens of times before spitting it back out like a bad piece of meat. Flying through the air and still spinning, Pinsir hit the ground in front of Samurai hard enough to leave an actual imprint of its body. When the Twister died down and all became still once more, the horned beetle was seen laying unconscious with swirls in its eyes. Misty raised her hand seeing that and pointed toward her friend. Since Samurai has no more Pokémon to battle with, that means the victory goes to Pidgeotto and Ash. With their victory secured, Ash ran up to his newly evolved Pokémon and hugged her tightly, congratulating her on evolving and thanking her for winning the match for them. After he returned her, the victorious young man walked up to Samurai, who had just returned Pinsir. "That was a great battle, Samurai. Thank you." The helmeted boy looked at him and smiled. "No, thank you, Ash. That was truly the greatest battle I have ever had. After facing the other 3 trainers from Palette, I can safely say that you are, without a doubt, the best. I wish you well on your journey. May you and your Pokémon prosper wherever you may go, my friend." He stuck his hand out and Ash accepted the invitation, shaking firmly with the other trainer. "Thank you, Samurai. I wish you well on whatever you do from here out as well. Hopefully we can meet again someday." The other boy smiled and nodded, handling his defeat graciously. "Agreed. I hope for that as well." Misty looked up at the sky at that moment and frowned as she noticed the yellow and purple hue that was gradually giving way to night. "You know we'll be lucky to get out of this forest before dark, Ash, let alone make it to Pewter City." "Huh." Ash looked back at her and then up at the sky before frowning. "Yeah, you're right. We might have to camp here for the night and set out in the morning." At that, Samurai smiled and held up a finger. "I have another suggestion. Why do you not just come stay with me? I have a cabin here in the forest that will take you out of the elements. If you are interested." The two of them shared a look between them before glancing back at the other boy and saying at the same time, "Sure, that sounds great." With that decided, they followed Samurai as he left the clearing and headed into the forest. Before long the road was behind them and, with the armored boy as their only guide, the group of 3 departed into the thick of the wild. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX and cozy log cabin, which he found shortly after coming to the forest and had fixed up. Ash and Misty were well rested and ready for the next leg of their journey. The time was early morning, about 2 hours before 8, and the previous evening of genial and laid-back conversation had been just what was needed to recharge their batteries. Samurai had even proven to be an enjoyable person to chat with, given his long time spent in the forest and all the stories he was able to share. Alas, the time had now finally come to part ways as Ash, with Pikachu on his shoulder and Misty by his side, stood at the end of Viridian Forest. Samurai was with them, seeing them off, and he said his goodbyes kindly and politely. Farewell my friends, I do hope our paths meet again. Both traveling friends nodded in agreement. I do too Samurai. You turned out to be an okay guy. Misty smiled but then got right up into the boy's face and turned fierce like a granbull the next second. But don't ever go scaring people with swords again. Got that? The bug-type enthusiast quickly leaned back with his hands out in front of him and smiled nervously while sweat dropping. Yes of course, I understand completely. Those days are behind me I assure you, I have learned my lesson well. She nodded in satisfaction at that and stepped back. Ash, taking his own moment, smiled fondly at the strange but nice boy. Well, so long Samurai. You were my first official Pokémon battle and I had a lot of fun. We learned a lot too, me and my Pokémon, so thank you. And thanks again for letting us stay with you last night. Samurai smiled and the two shook hands as friends. After that, Ash and Misty continued on the main road that left Viridian Forest and went on their way, waving back at the bug-type trainer as they walked. Samurai, for his part, waved in return and said a final farewell. Before turning and heading back into the forest. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX they were getting closer to Pewter City with every step. The sun was also rising higher in the sky, and its bright illumination gave clear visual of their surroundings for miles around. As they went along their way, down a flat stretch of land, they could see the distant peaks of Mt. Moon, which towered above and behind Pewter City like a giant. The mountain actually separated Pewter City from Cerulean City, and any travelers who wished to go to either one had to traverse through the mountain itself. They would be taking that same road soon, but for now, they were only focused on reaching the destination set before them. Just as the two of them passed under a large tree that was on the left side of the road, however, Ash suddenly felt a heavy weight land on his back, which pushed him to the ground. Whatever it was that had jumped onto him started leaping up and down on his back, causing the boy to become annoyed as he turned around to face his assaulter. When he stood up and looked, his pack fell off his shoulders, and it was then that Ash finally saw the perpetrator. Yet, to his surprise, he found that it was none other than a Mankey. The pig monkey Pokémon had a hold of his pack and was slinging it around with glee as the fighting type trumpeted its success. Mankey. Mankey. Both traveling friends, as well as Pikachu, simply stared in confusion, with Misty voicing it. "What is a Mankey doing out here near Pewter City?" "I don't know," Ash replied slowly before pulling out his Pokédex and scanning the out-of-place Pokémon. Pokédex entry number 056. Mankey, the pig monkey Pokémon. An agile Pokémon that lives in trees. It angers easily and will not hesitate to attack anything. If one gets angry, all the others around it will get angry, so silence is a rare visitor in a troop of Mankey. This Mankey is male and has the abilities Vital Spirit, Anger Point and Defiant. This Pokémon knows the moves: Scratch, Low Kick, Focus Energy, Fury Swipes, Karate Chop and Seismic Toss. After scanning it, Ash would admit to being impressed. The Mankey before him knew a lot of fighting-type moves, to be sure. A Pokémon like that on his team would be exceedingly beneficial, especially after some hard training. With that in mind, he knew that he needed to catch it. He didn't know where the mysterious thief of a monkey had come from, but he did know that he was going to try capturing it. With that decided, he turned to his friend. "Stay back, Misty. Mankeys have really foul tempers, so once I start battling him, he's gonna get mad." For a moment it seemed like she might protest, but she instead decided to trust him. "Okay Ash, just be careful." He nodded soundly and then put Pikachu into her arms, though he quickly protested that action with a loud, "Pika Pie." However, Ash merely shook his head. "No Pikachu, I need you to stay with Misty. If that Mankey goes to attack, I want you here to defend her." "Okay." The small electric type nodded in reluctant understanding. "Pikachu Pie." Smiling, he gave his Pokémon a quick rub between the ears. "Thanks buddy, I appreciate it." After that, he went over to stand before the mischievous Pokémon now playing with his bag and faced it. Ash then pulled out a Pokeball and threw it up into the air. "Badoo, I choose you." In a flash of light the small Hoenn grass type appeared and announced herself with an energetic, "Bud Badoo." Looking at his Pokémon, Ash asked seriously, "Are you ready, Badoo? This won't be easy." Turning a bit to look back at her trainer, she nodded firmly. Badoo. Seeing her resolve, he smiled proudly. "Okay then, let's do it." Pointing, he commanded, "Run at Mankey and slam into it with all your body weight." Lowering her head for the impromptu, unofficial move, she charged at Mankey and hit it head-on, sending the pig monkey flying back against the tree it came from. Almost immediately, the fighting Pokémon came running back, visibly angered and ready to go. As soon as it reached her, Mankey raised its hand and prepared to use Karate Chop. However, Ash ordered his Pokémon to jump out of the way and she did so just in time. At that same moment, the dynamic monkey performed a low kick that swept Badoo off of her feet. It then used a scratch attack, combined with a follow-up Karate Chop, which threw Badoo down into the ground hard. "Badoo, are you alright?" Ash yelled in concern. Fortunately, she nodded slowly and then stood up. Seeing she was still ready to battle, he issued another command. "Alright, use growth and follow it up with Mega Drain." Without waiting she rooted herself and started to raise her grass-type power level. On the other side of the road, Mankey began doing the same thing by using focus energy. Soon, Badoo shot out dark green tendrils of energy from herself that headed straight for Mankey. Utilizing quick speed, Mankey made use of its now increased agility and strength to jump high into the air. It then hurtled back down in front of the unprepared Badoo and started hitting her with a vicious assault of fury swipes. Ash's first captured Pokémon almost started to buckle when Mankey picked her up and spun her around. It then jumped, still holding onto the small grass type, before throwing her to the ground with a powerful seismic toss. Badoo hit the ground yet again and simply lay there, not moving. Ash, though worried for her, remained calm and called out, "Listen to me, Badoo. I know you can do this. You just need to dig deep down inside of yourself and find the strength to keep pushing. I know you're strong enough to beat this Mankey. Get up and do it." Badoo heard her trainer's voice and encouragement and, unwilling to give up, she slowly started to get back up. When she was finally standing on both legs, wobbly but unwavering, she stared down Mankey with fire in her eyes. Ash smiled at the sight of her determination. "Okay, Badoo, start charging in like you were gonna slam into Mankey again." The hardy little living bud started running towards Mankey as fast as she could. Her opponent prepared to jump out of the way and hit her with another fighting move, but Ash was quicker on the draw. "Now Badoo, jump over Mankey and hit it with Leech Seed." Badoo gathered all the strength in her lower body that her training offered her and then launched herself over Mankey, shooting a Leech Seed pod down at the pig monkey Pokémon. The seed hit its mark and, unfolding its vines around the angry fighting type, began to sap Mankey of its strength, which caused it to look up and cry, "Mankey!" Seeing his intended quarry now distracted by the vines that were shocking and stealing its energy, Ash smirked. "Badoo, use Razor Leaf and then follow up with Mega Drain." The earliest stage of Roserade flipped her head back and forth, expelling a rain of sharp leaves out of her bud that swarmed the restrained fighting type and sent it skidding through the dirt. This had the added effect of freeing Mankey from the small, spidery vines that had been trapping it. Before the furry monkey could capitalize on its freedom though, Badoo summoned her inner photosynthetic energy and lashed out at Mankey with Mega Drain. The fighting Pokémon was helpless to fight back as the spindly tendrils of ethereal aura worked to sap it of all the stamina Mankey had left. Seeing their time had come, Ash gave one final command. "Time to finish this, Badoo, use Stun Spore." She acted swiftly and began letting loose the paralytic yellow powder from her bud that quickly settled down over Mankey, effectively paralyzing the other Pokémon completely. Ash knew it was over when he saw the fighting type go still and went to congratulate Badoo for her win when, suddenly, she raised her head to the sky and called out, "Booid." In that very moment, something occurred that Ash was not counting on, especially so soon. The dew began to glow blue and white, signaling her evolution. As he watched in amazement, his first grass type started to change and morph before his very eyes until, within a matter of seconds, a totally different and considerably taller Pokémon stood before him. The newly evolved Hoenn native only remained motionless for a short time before raising her now flower-petaled hands and chanting smoothly while twirling gracefully on the spot. Roselia. Ash himself could only stare in shock for a few long moments before his brain finally caught up with him and he ran over, sliding to his knees to hug his newly evolved Pokémon. "I'm so proud of you, but I mean Roselia. That was a great battle you had against Mankey." Roselia smiled happily in her trainer's arms and hugged him back. Roselia. After spending a few moments congratulating and embracing her, Ash finally returned Roselia and then walked over to the paralyzed Mankey. Bending down, he pulled out an empty Pokeball and then tapped it gently upon the primate's head. Holding the ball in his hand, he watched it roll around a few times before going still and giving the signature star burst to show a successful capture. Afterward, he turned around and smiled as Pikachu leapt from Misty's arms and bounded over to him. "Whatcha think, buddy?" Bending down, Ash held up the now occupied Pokeball. "We got another new friend and Badoo evolved." Smiling in joy for their team's newest accomplishments, Pikachu gave a peace sign and then jumped back onto his favorite perch. "Pikachu pie Pikachu. I'm happy for you and everything, Ash, but you're not gonna release Mankey right now, are you?" Misty asked nervously as she walked over to them. "I bet you it's still gonna be really mad at the moment. Even if it is paralyzed." Pulling out his Pokédex to perform the transfer he was going to need to do if he wanted to keep Mankey with him, since he already had 6 Pokémon, Ash shrugged. "Nah, I wanna get Mankey healed up, but I'll wait until we go to the Pokémon Center at Pewter City. It'll give it time to calm down." She nodded, appearing immensely relieved, before looking back up at the tree Mankey had been in. "I wonder where it came from though. Mankey aren't normally found around here." Deciding to send Rattata back to the lab as he placed its ball onto the teleporter pad, the young rookie focused on what he was doing. "I don't know, Pokémon do strange things." After Rattata's Pokeball was sent off, Ash put his Pokédex away and then shrunk and clipped Mankey's ball to his belt. "Come on, let's get going, Mist. Pewter City's pretty close from here. We'll talk about it on the way." She was in agreement with that suggestion and thus, they were soon setting out once again for the stony city of Pewter. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX and Ash stepped through the last bit of woods they had encountered before reaching Pewter City. Though the Viridian forest had technically ended some ways back along the way they had come, the sparse bit of woodland and forest between Viridian Forest and Pewter City were considered loosely connected to the former. I wanna spend one more week training with my team before we challenge our first gym leader. The messy-haired boy crossed his hands behind his head. And I have Mankey now. If I want to use him in the match, then it's gonna take some pretty rough training between now and then. At that moment, they finally came within view of Pewter City itself. Walking out onto a large rock at the top of a woody hill that overlooked the city below, Ash smiled and put his hands on his hips. Awesome. We're finally here. Misty brushed her arms off. I'm just glad to be out of that creepy bug forest. Stepping off the rock, Ash put a hand over his eyes and hummed. Looks like the road cuts down through these trees and into the city. It looks like a pretty big place. I think I can even see the contest hall from here. Misty smiled. It's funny, from here a bunch of the buildings look like they're made of stone. Suddenly, from somewhere below the hill they were standing upon, a rugged male voice spoke stoically. Pewter City is gray, the color of stone. A slight pause. This town has always been famous for stone. Looking down, Ash and Misty saw a man sitting beside some steps that they just noticed had been built into the side of the hill. Strangely enough, there were plain gray rocks of various sizes and shapes sitting on the steps. And each one of them were labeled with a certain credit amount, showing they were for sale. The man himself was sitting beside the steps cross-legged. He had a long dark brown beard, tan skin and was wearing a red toboggan hat, a yellow shirt, long green pants, dark boots and white gloves on his hands. Further on, some distance away to the right of the man, tucked back against the forest border, was a small wooden cabin. There were rocks all around the outside of the rustic lodgings, which also had credit tags on them, showing that it was most likely his home. Looking down at the man again as they reached the bottom of the steps, Ash blinked at him before glancing back at Misty, whom was still standing on the steps. "Do you know this guy?" She shook her head. "Never met him." Looking at the two kids, he raised a hand and introduced himself. "My name is Flint and you were just standing on some of my merchandise." The two young trainers looked back at the rocks he was gesturing toward, specifically the big one atop the hill, and then Ash asked, "You sell rocks?" Flint crossed his arms. "Pewter City souvenirs. Wanna buy some?" The boy shook his head. "No thanks, we're on the way to the Pokémon Center. I'm gonna spend the next week training before I challenge the gym leader here." At that, Flint raised an eyebrow. You're gonna challenge Brock?" Smiling, Ash nodded. "That's right." The bearded man simply gave a grunting sound before standing up. "Well, if you'd like I can escort you both to the Pokémon Center. It's not far in town." The friends shared a look between each other and Ash shrugged. "Looks can be deceiving, I suppose. He's a really nice guy." Misty went to nod in agreement before Flint leaned over and pointed. "Oh, and by the way, that'll be a 2-credit charge for standing on my rocks." Hearing that, they both fell flat to the ground in a full-on face fault. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX way, Ash and Misty stared up at the huge building towering before them. The bottom level was made up of multiple glass windows and the sides, foundation and middle section of the building were all crafted out of solid stone. The top of the center had a small circular tower resting on it, which was also comprised of glass windows and stone, and a large satellite was fixed atop of it like a flag on a sandcastle. On the middle stone section separating the bottom and top parts of the center there was a large black P that certified the building as a legitimate League medical facility. And on the very top of the center, on both ends, were two large Pokeballs. Steps lead up to the center from the street and the lot was enclosed by finely cut grass and well-maintained, large green bushes, completing the neat and tidy look. Walking into the center, they entered a wide and open lobby, finely furnished and very clean. Though, it was apparent to see from size comparison that the Pewter Center lobby wasn't as large or spacious as the Viridian one had been. After thanking the mysterious rock merchant and seeing him off, Ash and Misty went up to the front desk where Nurse Joy was doing something on her computer. When she saw them, the pretty nurse smiled and gave a warm greeting. "Well, hello and welcome to the Pewter City Pokémon Center. My name is Nurse Joy. How may I assist you today?" Ash stepped forward. "We just need a healing session and a checkup for our Pokémon, please." Misty lifted her finger. "And a room for the next week if you have any available, please, Nurse Joy." She nodded and chirped in reply. "Of course, we have plenty of rooms available and you may stay as long as you like. Now about your Pokémon." With that, they handed their Pokeballs into Joy and then, just before giving Pikachu up, Ash asked, "I've been anxious to know, how are all the Pokémon doing that were sent here from the Viridian Center? Can you tell us please, Nurse Joy?" She tilted her head in confusion for a moment and looked at both kids. "Well, how do you know about that? Did you see it on the news?" Misty shook her head. "No ma'am, we were with the Nurse Joy in Viridian City when the center there was destroyed." Hearing this, Joy's eyes widened. "Wait, are you two Ash and Misty?" They looked at each other and then Ash nodded. "Yeah, that's us. How did you know?" Smiling brightly, the female nurse explained. "Oh well, my little sister told me all about how you kids helped her. She said that if it wouldn't have been for you, the Pokémon at her center would have been stolen, or worse. You both are real heroes the way I heard it." Misty turned a tad red at the compliment and Ash rubbed the back of his neck. "I wouldn't say that, Nurse Joy. We just did what we could to help us all." "Well, I appreciate your modesty," Joy began kindly. "But you two really did an amazing thing and you have our gratitude for it. And I know the trainers of those Pokémon would feel the same way. Misty asked the question she knew was on both of their minds. Has any of those trainers come to get their Pokémon? Joy shook her head in the negative. No. My sister called me this morning and said that the Pokémon League will have a new transporter machine delivered and set up within the week. She managed to convince all the trainers to just wait in Viridian until it arrives, and then she'll have me send all the Pokémon back to her. The city council already motioned to give her a temporary location to reopen her practice once the league restocks all of her supplies, so things are looking up. Ash and Misty both looked relieved to hear the good news, and with all that said, Pikachu finally jumped up onto the counter. A Chansey pushing a cart soon appeared and, after getting all the Pokeballs situated on it, Ash said his goodbyes with Pikachu. Just before Nurse Joy followed the cart off, Ash stopped her with a raised hand. "Oh, wait, Nurse Joy. Can you please?" he began while reaching for his Pokédex clipped to his side. "Register me for the Indigo League before you go." The smooth-skinned woman looked at the black and red device being held out to her and then smiled before taking it. "Of course, Ash, give me just a minute." After that, she instructed Chansey to take the cart back and wait for her in the medical ward. From there, she took Ash's Pokédex and slipped it into a slot on the side of her computer. Typing a few keys once she did that, it only took a few seconds before the green light on the small device blinked and a dinging sound registered from the computer. "Alright, there you go." Removing the Pokédex from the slot, she handed it to the boy and smiled again. "You're all registered for the Indigo League." Ash thanked her once he received his Pokédex back, and then afterward, she nodded at both kids. "If you two need anything else while you're here, please don't hesitate to ask. It is a pleasure having you at my center." Feeling flattered by her kindness and gratitude, they graciously accepted her praise, and then Ash turned to his traveling companion. "So, wanna go find a place to eat?" Misty offered him an agreeable smile. "You know I am pretty hungry, let's do it." With that, the two friends left the Pokémon Center and headed out to explore Pewter City and find a good restaurant to enjoy a well-deserved, relaxing meal. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX a series of jabs and kicks down the clearing they were training in. The weighted bodysuit and small, shiny silver dumbbells he held in his hands made it all the harder. Beside him, Mankey, whom was equally weighted down, was mirroring his trainer. They made it all the way to the end of the clearing and then turned around and started going the other way again. Though this time they did rolls, jumping kicks and other explosive combat techniques to do so. Nearby in the clearing, Ash's other Pokémon were in the midst of their own exhaustive training routines. Pikachu, Roselia, Pidgeotto, Weedle and Caterpie. Each one was pushing themselves as hard as they could in their individual training routines. It had been 3 days since arriving in Pewter City, and outside of sightseeing and spending time getting to know Misty better, Ash had spent a large amount of time training himself and his Pokémon into the ground to prepare for the upcoming gym match. Pikachu, Weedle and Caterpie were still performing the same all-encompassing training regimens they had been given, but Pidgeotto and Roselia's own had to be slightly tweaked due to their evolution. While Roselia's general plan and method of training was the same in terms of physicality, move drilling, combat practice and other related routines, the overall intensity had been increased. For one, Ash had increased the weight she wore, which made moving gracefully for her a difficult feat. Though she had been improving, he had also started drilling her much harder on her moves, especially her energy-draining ones. That meant she had been giving the trees in their small training area one serious workout, although she was careful not to harm them and drained too much energy at one time without returning it. Naturally, as a petite and gentle Roselia, it meant that she wasn't made to take a large amount of damage at one time. Thus, Ash had naturally been drilling her hard on training methods and techniques that was meant to heighten and increase her overall durability and resistance. Pidgeotto was essentially in the same boat as Roselia. Her training remained the same concerning its foundational principles, but Ash had considerably upped the weight she wore. He had also increased the amount of time she did flight training, as well as her ground-running drills, her wing and talon combat fighting routines and her total body physical training. Out of everything, Pidgeotto had struggled the most with swimming drills. Since Ash was a proponent for attacking every potential weak spot one had, he had even been working with Pidgeotto on how to swim. Which was something he also wanted to get Spearow on as soon as he came back from the lab. While swimming for birds was a very foreign concept, it was the same in theory as someone with arms and legs. Mostly, Pidgeotto kept herself afloat in the water, moved through it and even dove by making use of her wings, tail feathers and feet. The body mechanics to the technique had been tough to get and Ash had struggled with her over the last 3 days. Yet, thankfully, there was a river that flowed near the forested clearing they occupied daily and it was perfect for just that type of training. Of course, Pidgeotto wasn't the only one Ash had been splashing around with in his newfound swim training routine. Pikachu, Roselia and Mankey had been joining them as well. Alas, Weedle and Caterpie simply didn't possess the physical means to move around aquatically. Instead, they stuck to their rigorous ground training schedule. Overall, Pikachu and Mankey had picked up swimming the soonest, especially the latter. Roselia had been a little slower going but she too eventually got her petals and small legs working in the right manner. Pidgeotto had struggled the most for obvious reasons, yet she had been picking it up at her own pace. Ash could tell that with her water, ground and air training, the latter two being done while wearing heavy weights, the evolved flying type was already growing in terms of sheer physical ability. Her flight speed increased, as well as her endurance and stamina. Her durability had also made impressive gains, her moves were becoming more and more powerful and she had fully adapted to her evolved form. All things that would greatly aid her once she evolved into a Pidgeot. As for Mankey, Ash's newest Pokémon had begun a grueling regimen. Since he was a fighting type, Ash had been working with Mankey personally on imparting the same knowledge and skills that his own Pokémon fighting coaches had given him. Every day thus far they had been drilling on a vast array of fighting drills and techniques. Concerning the moves Mankey already knew, as well as the routines and combinations Ash had to teach him. On top of hardcore fighting and combat training, which was done with Ash and the other Pokémon, Mankey also did a punishing retinue of physical drills and moves to increase every level of his fitness ability. From strength, cardio, resistance, flexibility and every other area of physical skill that could be improved upon. Ash had him do sprints, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, swimming, rock tossing and pushing, anything that could be done as a workout, he did. What was more, Mankey also did it while weighted down with a hefty bodysuit. Plus, since he had fingered hands, it also allowed him to do exercises and drills with dumbbells. Like Ash and Pikachu did. Thankfully, Ash saw that he had indeed made the right decision. In waiting for Mankey to calm down after his capture, he found that the spirited fighting type was far more amicable after being healed up at the Pokémon Center and given a night to rest. Since Mankey apparently loved fighting so much anyway, getting him on board with rough training and intense combat drills had been admittedly straightforward and simple. All Ash had to do was keep him satisfied each day with the special, individualized meal plan he had worked up just for the fighting type and Mankey was a happy camper. Of course, the young man would admit to forever being mystified concerning why his newest Pokémon liked its food so much. The special food pellets, mixed with vitamins and other such enhancers, had been painstakingly worked upon by Ash but the final recipe Mankey preferred had a very strong and bitter taste. The messy-haired trainer always tried his Pokémon food pellets once he was done making them, if only to ensure they were good, and normally they were not so bad. True, he found all Pokémon food gross, regardless of the different flavors he added into every batch for each Pokémon, but Mankey's was a whole different level of disgusting. At least to him. Once he was finished training with his newest Pokémon, Ash dismissed the hard-working fighting type from the long and intense workout they had been doing all afternoon. Afterward, he walked over toward the river, where Pikachu was practicing his thunderbolts on a big rock. Pika-Chu! Cried the small but powerful electric type as he emitted a massive bolt of thunder from his small body that struck the sturdy rock head-on. Utilizing the focused lightning component of his electrical attacks, Pikachu had launched a highly condensed and far more intense bolt of lightning at the boulder. His sole purpose being to shatter it with pure electrical power alone. As Ash watched, sweating from his brow after the hard workout, Pikachu's entire body glowed like it was a miniature generator. Hurrying up to his partner's side, he clenched his fists and egged the small Pokémon on. "Come on Pikachu. You've got this buddy, you can do this. You can do it." Narrowing his eyes, Pikachu turned up the power and gritted his teeth while growling. "Pika!" Then, with his tail straight out like an arrow behind him, he pushed more force into his lightning bolt. Amazingly, the large rock started to crack and chunks of it began flying off in all directions like sharp little projectiles. Then, with a final loud cry of, "Pikachu!" the boulder gave way to the overwhelming force of condensed lightning and completely shattered into dozens of tiny pieces. After succeeding in his destructive endeavor, Pikachu powered down and relaxed. With a soft sigh of, "Chaw!" he sat down and panted as the exertion of their long training session finally caught up to him. "Hey Pikachu, that was great," Ash praised as he knelt next to the small electric type. "You totally showed that rock who was boss, nice work. Coming along really well." Pikachu looked up at his trainer and smiled with a chirpy, "Pika." Though their moment of celebration was soon cut off by a voice saying, "So you weren't kidding after all, huh?" Turning around at the sound of the voice, Ash saw the man he and Misty had met 3 days earlier, Flint, standing next to a tree near the edge of the clearing. "Oh, it's you. How are you, Flint?" the boy asked politely as the bearded man walked over to them. "Not bad. I was just taking a stroll through the forest looking for more rocks to add to my merchandise when I heard you and your Pokémon training." Flint looked around at Ash's Pokémon as they trained in the clearing. "Guess you weren't all talk after all." The rookie blinked at him. "Huh, what do you mean?" The older man crossed his arms and looked around the clearing. "Well, when you said you planned on challenging Brock, I thought you were just another upstart rookie who was getting in over his head. But after watching you train for a while, I can see you're serious. Your Pokémon looked good, strong." Smiling at the praise of his Pokémon, Ash rubbed the back of his neck. "Aw, thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, we train like this every day. We just wanna get stronger together." He glanced down at Pikachu. "Right, buddy. Hi Pikachu," came his eager reply from down on the ground. Flint stared at Ash for a moment and then looked down at Pikachu before finally speaking again. "Tell you what, if you're interested, I'll show you a way you can make that Pikachu of yours even stronger. If you do something for me first." The messy-haired boy tilted his head to the side. "What's that?" Flint put his hands on his hips. "Beat me in a 2-on-2 Pokémon battle and I'll show you how to make Pikachu stronger." The only son of Delia and Richard looked surprised initially, but he quickly bounced back and grinned at the prospect of a battle. "That's it. All right then, you're on. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX other on either side of the clearing. All of Ash's Pokémon were now standing by behind him, waiting to see if they would be needed for the battle ahead. "Yeah, I'm ready, Flint," he called back. "Let's do it." Nodding, the bearded man pulled a Pokeball out of his pocket and then enlarged it before throwing it into the air. "Come on, Golem." From the ball burst forth, in a shining eruption of light, the spherical rock-type and evolved form of Graveler. As it appeared on the grassy surface of the clearing, Flint's Pokémon extended its small arms upward and gave a low, grunting groan. Golem. Seeing their first opponent, Ash narrowed his eyes and thought to himself. "Let's see here. Golem is a rock and ground type. I really wanna work my Pokémon out against types they're weak against, so this might be the best of time as any." After thinking over his options for a few moments, he finally decided and looked back at his Pokémon. "Pidgeotto, you're up, girl." With a caw of obedience, she quickly took to flight and flapped her way into battle position, landing softly in front of her trainer in preparation for what was to come. Seeing the boy's choice, Flint raised a single eyebrow. "You're going to use a flying type against my Golem." He raised his head and laughed. "Ah ha ha ha, Maybe you're more of a rookie than I thought. Ash merely smiled and got himself ready. We'll see about that. However, just before the battle could start, they suddenly heard, "Hey, what's going on here?" and turned to see that Misty had walked into the clearing. Seeing Ash and the strange man they had met days before facing off in what was obviously going to be a Pokémon battle, she called over to her friend. "Ash, what are you doing?" Looking her way, he waved back. "It's all right, Misty, me and Flint are just gonna have a real fast battle." Not understanding but deciding to simply go with it, she went silent and walked over to join Ash's Pokémon behind him. With her out of the way, both trainers finally began their match. Though Ash, wanting to play it safe and get a feel for Flint's battling style, waited and remained patient. Seeing this, the older man decided to make the first move. Golem use Rock Throw. Raising up, Golem chanted its name as a ring of glowing gray rocks appeared in a circle around it. They didn't stay that way though, since it immediately sent them all flying at Pidgeotto. "Get out of the way of those rocks, Pidgeotto," Ash commanded swiftly. Showing very impressive speed, she shot off to the right side in a fast takeoff maneuver and ascended into the air. Due to her fast movement, the rocks all hit the ground where she had just been and missed their mark. Flint, on the other hand, rapidly ordered his Pokémon to use the same move again. This Golem did, sending another barrage of large rocks hurtling at the now airborne bird. Without needing to be prompted, Pidgeotto swiftly rolled away to the other side and avoided the second salvo as well. Ash, for his part, still gave no command for an attack. "Pidgeotto, stay airborne and keep alert. Just use your speed and evasiveness right now." She nodded at his words without hesitation. "Pidgeot." Shaking his head, Flint spoke on what he was seeing. "You can't win in a battle if all you do is avoid and evade." Golem use Rock Slide. Hands up once more, the turtle-headed Pokémon called out in a voice that echoed throughout the clearing. Golem. From the power surge that the rock type utilized, several small blue portals opened up in the sky directly above the clearing. However, from those small portals fell far larger boulders that were considerably larger than the rocks Golem had earlier summoned. As the large slabs of stone fell to the earth above and all around Pidgeotto, Ash acted fast and called out. Pidgeotto used agility to get away from all those rocks. In a perfect way of demonstrating the speed and agile grace she had been obtaining through her intense training, the female bird disappeared into thin air. This caused the first large boulder to fall harmlessly to the ground and smash onto the grassy surface without harming one feather on her body. Displaying a feat of aerial evasiveness that was most impressive, Pidgeotto flew gracefully in, out and around each gray boulder that came raining down at her from above. Disappearing and reappearing at different points all across the airspace of the clearing, the swiftly flying Pokémon maneuvered her way precisely around the cascading avalanche to avoid getting it. Down she flew to avoid one, then in an upward curving ascent to narrowly miss another. With a cry of, "Pidgeot!" she banked sharply to the left to get around the next one and then took a rapid ascent down and up to move out of harm's way of the last rock. The clearing shook and trembled as each boulder hit the ground, but when Flint saw Pidgeotto flying low to avoid the last one, he took advantage of that. Golem used Takedown. Since their opponent was now closer to the ground, Golem took off running and then leapt into the air. Pidgeotto didn't see it coming since she had been focused on avoiding the hail of boulders, but when Golem reached her, she did notice. With all of its heavy mass, the sturdy rock type smashed itself into her and sent Pidgeotto falling out of the air with a cry of pain. Ash saw her fall, but he wasn't able to help her as she hit the ground hard. Following that up, Flint ordered his Pokémon to use a Mega Punch. Thus, capitalizing on its momentum, Golem ran at Pidgeotto as she lay dazed on the ground and then smashed a glowing fist straight into her chest. Crying out again, she flew through the air against her own will and landed once more on the ground with a painful sounding thud. Misty cringed when she saw that and looked at Ash. "Call Pidgeotto back, she can't beat Golem. The typing isn't fair." However, he remained calm and smiled. "Don't worry, Misty, it'll be alright." Once Pidgeotto got back to her feet, Ash spoke to her. "Are you okay to keep going, girl?" Looking back at him, she nodded without any doubt. Pidgeot. Deciding to end the battle quickly, Flint made the next move. I'll show you that your friend is right, Ash, sometimes you need to know when to play it smart. With that said, he ordered Golem to use Rock Throw again. However, just when the rock-bodied Pokémon summoned and launched a third salvo of glowing gray stone, Ash yelled. Pidgeotto used agility to get out of the way and then quick attack to get behind Golem. Narrowing her eyes, she waited until just the right moment and then disappeared in a blur of speed, easily avoiding the rocks that were shot at her. Then, in a burst of white, she managed to blitz around behind Golem and flew up above it. Good, now use Gust. On her trainer's command, she used her powerful wings to churn up a strong gust of wind that hit Golem head-on. Even though it wasn't enough to do any damage, it did cause the rock type to slide back across the grassy earth quite a few feet. Flint didn't understand why Ash had his Pokémon do such a thing, but he merely chalked it up to a rookie mistake as he ordered his own Pokémon to use yet another rock throw technique. Mostly since it was one of the only moves that could be used to reach Pidgeotto in the air. Confusing both he and Misty though, Ash simply called for Pidgeotto to dodge the attack and use Gust again, just like before. She did so, flying away from the rocks and whipping up another powerful windstorm that pushed Golem back even farther across the clearing. To make matters even stranger, it seemed to be a strategy Ash wasn't keen on abandoning. Flint continued to have Golem use Rock Throw in a vain attempt to hit Pidgeotto, but each time she would dodge and then use Gust again. Finally, after rinsing and repeating the same tactic over and over, Flint grew frustrated. If this is how you're going to battle Brock, then I'm afraid to say you're going to lose, young man. Golem used Rock Slide again. Just when the slow and stocky rock type was about to summon its energy to call upon another big rain of boulders, Ash smirked. Got ya. Quick as a flash, he yelled. Pidgeotto, use Quick Attack to fly around Golem as fast as you can. Shooting downward like lightning, she started flying in a perfect circle around her opponent at speeds that took her in over a dozen rotations every few seconds. Golem became confused seeing this, but what really threw it off was the cloud of sand and dust that her actions caused to shoot up around it like a cloud. Unable to see, Golem's concentration was broken, and that was all Ash needed. Now I want you to use Twister. Make it as powerful as you can, girl. Raising up into the air, Pidgeotto started to flap her wings at a rapid pace. The faster and harder she moved them, the more powerful and intense the windstorm she started to create. Chanting her name on every wingbeat, the brightly colored bird kept at her action until, in the span of only a few seconds, she had managed to form a powerful and furiously spinning cyclone. One in which was fast and harsh enough that Misty and the other Pokémon had to root themselves to the ground. With a final pulse of her wings, Pidgeotto sent the whirling tornado spinning at Golem. Being caught utterly unprepared and off guard at the large cyclone speeding toward it, Golem leaned back and tried to get away. Unfortunately for both it and Flint though, Ash's strategy had now become clear. Looking back, Golem saw that all of Pidgeotto's gust attacks had pushed it across the clearing until it was now just a few feet away from falling back into the rushing river behind it. Eyes going wide, the now afraid rock type looked ahead again just as the large twister finally reached it and pulled Golem into its wildly spinning vortex. Flint and Misty both looked on in amazement as the now powerless evolved Pokémon was tossed and thrown around inside of the twister until, at last, Ash yelled over the noise of the wind. Pidgeotto. Finish it with Quick Attack. Rearing back, she built up the tension in her body before rocketing forward in a blur of speed at the spinning cyclone. Then, with the precision of her trained and highly accurate eyes, she picked Golem out in the twister and slammed into it. The force of her strike was great enough that it forced the evolved form of Geodude out of the tornado and through the air. Sadly, the only place for it to go was right back into the river, and that was exactly where it fell. With a loud and sizable splash, Golem was thrust into the element it hated the most and sunk some ways down beneath the current before managing to fight back to the surface. Acting as though it had been thrown into a scalding pot, Golem thrashed around madly in the water and somehow managed to paddle its way clumsily to the bank. From there, it very awkwardly lumbered up onto dry ground again. Sadly, the aquatic torture had been too much for it. Exhausted and done in by the unforeseen strategic attack, Golem fell down flat onto its front in the grass and laid there with swirls in its eyes. Stunned at what they had just seen, Flint and Misty stared for several moments, unable to react, while Ash cheered and pumped a fist into the air. Yes. That's it, Pidgeotto, you did it, girl. You did it. Perfect. Holding his arms out, he happily caught the victorious bird as she flew into his arms and then started to nuzzle his face with her beak in a sign of affection. Pidgeot. Pidgeot. Pikachu and the other Pokémon all burst into cheers for their teammates' victory, and Misty finally overcame her surprise enough to do the same. Wow, that was amazing, you two. Ash, that was genius, and Pidgeotto, you did so well. I can't believe you actually beat Golem, great job. Flint himself finally returned his defeated Pokémon from across the clearing and then smiled comfortingly at the Pokeball before looking up. I'll admit that was very impressive, Ash. I thought you merely had made a rookie mistake by using Pidgeotto against my Golem, but I see now that you had a strategy planned all along. You and Pidgeotto worked well together, nice work. With those words said, he put Golem's Pokeball away and pulled out another one. Let's see how you fare against this one. Go. Clicking the button to enlarge the ball, he tossed it while announcing, Raiden. With a loud and powerful bellow, the temperamental and bipedal evolved form of Rhyhorn exploded onto the scene in a flash of bright light and stars. Rai. Seeing their next and final opponent, Ash examined Flint's last Pokémon closely. Alright, so, another ground and rock type. This is probably a good time to test out what me and Pikachu have been working so hard on. Thanking Pidgeotto for her help, he allowed her to join the other Pokémon and then gestured for Pikachu. Come on, buddy, you're up. Smiling in pure excitement at the prospect of getting to battle, Pikachu eagerly bounded out in front of Ash and took a low battle crouch. With teeth bared, eyes narrowed and cheeks crackling, he looked not only ready for battle but almost as though he yearned for it. Pika. Though he didn't understand why Ash would have went with a second Pokémon that was even worse off against a dual ground rock type than Pidgeotto was, Flint wasn't so eager to chalk it up to simple inexperience. There was something unusual and highly unorthodox about the young trainer, and he wasn't going to rush into making hasty judgments about him. Raiden use Earthquake. He took action quickly, not leaving in any room for the boy to start any wild strategies. Flexing its arms, Raiden puffed itself up and then roared before slamming its hands down onto the ground. The forceful action caused the earth to begin shaking and trembling violently throughout the whole clearing. Pikachu, being so small, started to get bounced and shaken around, but Ash yelled out a command to assist his Pokémon. Pikachu, root yourself low to the ground and use your tail for stability. The small electric type dropped his body low to the ground and laid his tail out flat along its grassy surface for balance. Though he was no longer affected in such a way by the shaking, Flint gave another order of his powerful ground type. Raiden used Stone Edge. Around Raiden formed a ring of glowing, jaggedly pointed rocks that it sent flying on a collision course with Pikachu. Fortunately, the yellow mouse was as fast as he was agile, and it enabled him to regain his bearings from the earthquake in time to spring himself to the side in a roll. As the stone missiles struck the ground where he had just been and left a deep impression in it, Pikachu leapt up and took off at a fast blitz toward Raiden. This was on the direction of Ash, who yelled, "Pikachu, use quick attack." In a straight line of white energy that made him look like a streaking comet, Pikachu ran across the clearing at speeds nearly too fast to keep up with. He was nearing Raiden too when Flint preempted the incoming strike. Use Rock Blast. Raiden snorted and held its stocky arms out as a swirling circlet of small, glowing silver rocks appeared like a barrier around it. Then, when Pikachu was within a few yards of it, the powerhouse rock type unleashed its defensive counter. As the dozens of small but sharp rocks flew at him, Pikachu was lucky enough to have a trainer that could react on the fly. Jump and spin while using Thunder Shock. Not breaking stride, the little electric type leapt into the air and spun rapidly. As he did, he used the aforementioned electrical attack, but since he was spinning, it came out in a widespread, circular arc. The electric aerial defense acted like an actual shield around Pikachu and succeeded in zapping and deflecting all of the many small, sharp rocks that were attempting to hit him. Misty and Ash's other Pokémon all cheered when they saw this, but Flint only crinkled his nose up. Not bad at all. He then called out. Raiden used takedown. Since Pikachu hadn't yet landed back on the ground, the large and powerful dual-type grunted heavily before charging across the field toward the much smaller Pokémon. Pikachu, look out! Ash shouted just before Raiden came upon his airborne partner and then slammed its head into Pikachu. With a cry of, Pika! The evolved form of Pichu flipped through the air and then landed on the ground hard enough to bounce back off of it. Keeping the momentum going in their favor, the bearded man told Raiden to use a stomp attack. When the horned Pokémon converged on Pikachu, Misty fearfully exclaimed, Pikachu, look out! Just when the trunk-like foot of Raiden was about to descend down upon the electric mouse, Ash hurried to give a last-minute counter. Pikachu, spin on your back and use Thunder Wave. With no time to spare, the hardy little electric type started spinning himself in a fast circle on his back. At the same time, he began using Thunder Wave. In a tactic that was similar to his Thunder Shock defense from earlier, Pikachu created an arcing barrier of electricity around him. As Raiden's foot was descending down onto him, one of the streams of electricity crackling around him struck the larger Pokémon's foot. The sudden surprise and pain of getting zapped caused Raiden to stumble back a few paces. Out of danger but still very much in the running to win, Pikachu jumped up just as Ash commanded, use Quick Attack. Since Raiden was stumbling from a loss of footing, the burst of yellow and white that came hurtling at it wasn't able to be stopped or slowed down. Thus, Pikachu slammed his whole body into the two-legged evolved form of Rhyhorn and sent it stumbling back even further. Deciding to try their hand now or let it pass them by, Ash narrowed his eyes and became serious. Pikachu, get ready. He raised his hand. I want you to focus all of your energy and let all of your power surge through you right now. Build up your electrical energy and then let it go. Use. He paused for a moment and then drew his hand in before pointing one finger into the air. Focused Thunderbolt. Pikachu widened his stance and gritted his teeth as his cheeks started to spark. Not only did they spark, but as he started focusing on calling forth all of his energy and electrical power, his fur stood on end, his tail went straight up and his entire body began glowing. Almost as if he had turned into a little yellow nightlight. Ka. Ash clenched his fist. Focus Pikachu. Focus. Condense it. Condense that electrical energy and focus it. You know what you want to do now, make it happen. Put all that training to use right here. Pika. Pika. The louder Pikachu chanted, the more his cheeks sparked, the bigger those sparks became and the more his body glowed yellowish white. Raiden, stop whatever Pikachu's doing. Flint ordered hurriedly, feeling more than a little anxious at what the small little rodent was about to do. Use Drill Run. Roaring loudly in a show of dominance, Raiden started running toward Pikachu, but as it ran, its horn started to rotate. Then, in only a span of seconds, the large Pokémon surprisingly leapt off the ground as its entire body started to spin. Soon, Raiden looked like a living drill as it flew through the air at increasingly faster speeds while spinning more rapidly with each passing second. As Flint's Pokémon barreled toward them at full tilt, Ash yelled, Pikachu, we need that Thunderbolt. Let it go. Right now. At that very same moment, Pikachu's electrical energy reached its apex as the crackling sparks from his cheeks covered almost his entire body. Then, standing up on his hind legs, Pikachu brought his paws into his chest and closed his eyes. Pika! Pika! At last, just when time seemed to have run out, his eyes snapped open and it almost seemed as though electricity even passed through them. With that, he threw his arms out at the same time. A massive bolt of thunder erupted from his small body and shot straight up into the sky. Pika Achu! The bolt of lightning that fell back to the earth was so powerful, so large and so glorious that it seemed to be the very definition of lightning itself. In fact, the thunderbolt was so intense that, unlike normal ones, this one seemed to actually have density and weight to it. Like a waterfall crashing down from high rapids. With precise aim, the unusual and far more powerful bolt of lightning struck Raiden while it was spinning its way through the air toward Pikachu. Amazingly, especially to Flint and Misty, Raiden became completely halted in midair. Even though a common electrical attack should have had no effect whatsoever on a rock and ground type Pokémon, this one proved to be far different. Not only was Drill Run abruptly cancelled and ended without so much as one more rotation, Raiden was brought out of its tight ball and became suspended in the air like a live-action dummy. As the thick, heavy and almost golden bolt of thunder electrocuted Flint's Pokémon, all known logic of type matchups between species went right out the window. This was evidently and clearly seen by the way Raiden's eyes were bugged out of its skull while its arms, legs and even tail was stuck out ramrod straight like a steel pipe. Even its mouth was left wide agape as the condensed bolt of thunder kept it suspended off the ground and electrocuted it down to its very core. Passing right through the brute's iron-hard, tough-skinned natural defense and shattering what type advantage that Raiden had, only until now, enjoyed. When, at long last, the Titan-worthy bolt of lightning had run its course, Raiden's whole body disappeared for a moment due to the sheer brightness of light that encapsulated it. Finally, when the thunderbolt died down, it went out with one final explosive bang. The smoke and dust cloud that shot up into the air was big enough to be seen from the city, and Ash, Flint, Misty and the other Pokémon all had to look away initially. Even a small gust of wind was kicked up and blew through the clearing after the electrical explosion. When the dark cloud of smoke finally faded away and dissipated into the air, everyone got to see the results of Pikachu's final attack. Not only had the lightning bolt caused an explosion, but it even left a relatively deep and wide crater in the very ground itself. Yet, what shocked everyone the most was what was in the crater. There, in a crumpled and twitching heap, was Raiden. The dual-ground, rock-type Pokémon was laying unconscious in the crater. Swirls were in its eyes, its entire body was covered in scorch marks and a small electrical current was still passing through its body, visibly. Seeing this, Flint's mouth opened but he stammered to find the right words to speak. I don't believe it, how is that possible? An electrical attack shouldn't be able to do something like this. Misty herself even seemed stunned. No way. Raiden was both a ground and rock type. Pikachu's Thunderbolt shouldn't have worked at all. Let alone been able to do that. While Pikachu panted in exhaustion from the long afternoon of training, the battle and the last attack he used, Ash jumped into the air and pumped both fists. Yes. It worked. It really worked, Pikachu, it worked. Running out to his first Pokémon, he knelt down and scooped the small electric type into his arms. Pikachu, you did it, he praised with a shining smile. You actually used focused lightning in a real battle. And it worked. Though tired, Pikachu was nonetheless very pleased with himself and voiced it with a wave of both arms. Pikachu pie. Pikachu pie pie. Misty, whom had overcome her surprise at seeing Pikachu defeat a dual rock ground type Pokémon that he should have been weak against, and with an electric type attack of all things, stepped forward and smiled. I'll admit to being a little skeptical about that special training you've been having, Pikachu, do Ash, but after seeing that, I can't argue with the results. Flint, having returned his defeated Raiden, spoke up while walking over to join them. I agree. That was a great match, kid. Ash stood up and still held Pikachu in his arms while nodding in response. Thanks, Flint, you were great too. We had an awesome battle. Crossing his arms, the bearded man gave a small smile of his own. When I first heard you say that you wanted to challenge Brock, I thought you'd just end up going to the gym and getting creamed. When I saw you train, it made me reconsider, but now that I've seen you and your Pokémon in battle, I really think you could take Brock on and win. Misty interjected at that point. Excuse me, but why were you two battling anyway? Ash looked at his friend and answered. Well, Flint told me that if I beat him in a match, he'd show me a way to make Pikachu even stronger. At those words, the man in question nodded. And I will, later on this evening. First though, I think we should take our Pokémon to the center and get them healed up, especially Pikachu. He'll need to be in tip-top shape before we put him through what I have planned. Agreeing that a trip to the Pokémon Center would be a good idea, Ash returned all of his Pokémon and then left with Misty and Flint to head into town. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Nurse Joy, Ash and Misty could be seen walking behind Flint as he led them through the forest just outside of Pewter City. They were following alongside a branch channel of the main river, which had flowed beside the clearing that Ash and his Pokémon had trained in earlier. As they went, Misty leaned over and whispered, "Are you sure this is a good idea?" The black-haired boy smiled to reassure her. "I trust Flint. He raised his Pokémon well and you could see he cared about them in that battle earlier. Besides, if I don't like what he's offering, we'll just leave." Placated, she nodded and went silent just as they finally came out into a wider area of the river with large rocky shoals on either side of it. Sadly though, since Flint had led them off course of the main river tributary that flowed near town, the secondary water channel they were currently following was dry. Further up the dry riverbed there was a watermill with a water wheel attached to the side of it. The building was sitting right next to the currently empty water channel and Flint pointed at it as they came into view. "There, that's it. In there is how we'll increase Pikachu's electrical power." Ash and Misty shared a look before the former asked curiously, "How are we gonna make Pikachu stronger in there?" The bearded man looked back at them and explained, "You see that watermill has an electricity generator inside of it that's hooked up to the water wheel outside. Normally, when the water is flowing in this area of the river, that wheel turns. Of course as you can see right now, it isn't." Flint looked up at the evening sky, which was dark with rain clouds since the local forecast had been calling for a potential lightning storm. "We've been experiencing a small drought in this area lately. The main river channel you and I battled by earlier is almost always flowing because its source is in the mountains, coming straight down from Mt. Moon itself." He gestured at the dry riverbed beside them. "This is just an offshoot of that main channel. Why they put a water wheel here and not alongside the primary river I'll never know. But regardless, if you're ready to do some hard work Ash, this little setup might just benefit you and Pikachu." He then held up a hand. "We'll hook Pikachu up to the generator inside and then you'll manually turn the wheel outside. The faster you get it to go is the more power Pikachu'll have." Ash looked up at his first Pokémon and asked, "What do you think, bud? You wanna try it?" Excited at the prospect of attaining more power, he nodded firmly and clenched his small fists. Pikachu. With that decided, the boy looked at Flint and smiled. "Cool Flint, let's give this a try." A short while later, Flint and Misty were inside the building kneeling next to a large electrical generator machine. Pikachu was standing next to it hooked up by two wires that were connected to his cheeks. While Flint finished preparing the machine for what they were about to do, Misty walked over to the open window and looked out onto the water wheel. There, Ash was standing on top of it holding onto a bar as he readied himself to turn the large wheel and power up Pikachu. "Ash, are you ready?" she asked of her friend. "Yeah," he looked back at her. "Tell Flint I'm ready when he is." Looking up at the increasingly blackening sky though, he could hear the rumbling of thunder and felt raindrops beginning to slowly fall onto his face. "Might wanna tell him to hurry up though, I think it's gonna break out in a storm soon." Misty looked back inside and relayed the message. In a few moments, Flint nodded and called back, "Tell him he can start whenever he's ready." She did so and as soon as he received the go-ahead, Ash immediately began turning the wheel. He started off slow first, both to get used to it and also so as to not overwhelm Pikachu. Within only a short period of the wheel turning, electricity started to get generated by the machine. This in turn was fed to Pikachu, whose cheeks sparked to signify that he was receiving it. However, at first, the small Pokémon seemed not to notice anything as he blinked at Flint and Misty and looked around. As Ash continued to turn the wheel and his speed gradually quickened, so too did the rate at which the generator produced electricity and fed it into Pikachu. There was a small red bar on the front control panel as well that showed how much power was being generated. As the process continued and the time ticked by, Pikachu's cheeks continued to spark but he still seemed to be unaware. Seeing this, Misty looked at Flint. Why doesn't Pikachu seem to feel what's happening? The older man put a hand to his beard and hummed in thought. Well, it's just a guess, but after seeing Pikachu in battle I would say that he is able to store so much electrical energy that he simply doesn't feel the effects yet. It'd be like filling up a large bucket with only a small drizzle of water from a tap. She blinked and then looked at the energy meter, which was currently showing that the machine was close to producing half of its total output ratio. Are you kidding? The machine is already working to pump a lot of electricity into Pikachu, how can he not feel it? He's a small Pokémon, is this normal? Flint shook his head. No, I'd say not. A normal Pikachu should have felt the effect shortly after Ash started rotating the wheel. This one must be capable of storing a lot more power than I thought. He then yelled out, "Hey Ash, you might wanna turn up the pace, Pikachu still isn't feeling the flow." Outside on the water wheel, Ash, who had by now shed the outer part of his tracksuit, nodded with sweat starting to drip down his face. All right, got it. Steeling himself, the young man grabbed tightly onto the bar and began jogging to spin the wheel faster. His jog gradually turned into a run, and in no time at all, that run became an all-out sprint until he had the water wheel turning as fast as he could make it go. Inside, the generator experienced a massive power surge as the meter jumped up past 75%. At that, Pikachu did notice once the huge influx of electrical power was fed directly into his cheeks. Pie. His eyes opened wide and his ears perked up before he squeezed his paws into fists and closed his eyes with his tail going stiff behind him. There we go, now Pikachu is feeling it. Flint crossed his arms and leaned back while Ash kept spinning the wheel as fast as his legs could carry him. Come on Pikachu, he called out as rain started to fall heavier upon him and the wind also picked up. If I can do this, then so can you. Stay focused. As more and more electricity was generated by the wheel, siphoned by the machine and fed into Pikachu, the small electric type's cheeks began sparking violently while his body began to tremble from all the energy being pumped into him. When the meter started to climb up to 90%, Flint spoke quickly. All right, maybe we should stop now, Pikachu's got a lot of electricity pumped into him. However, before anyone could say anything, Pikachu himself gave a loud, Pika, and shook his head to signal that he wanted to keep going. Ash. Misty stuck her head out the window but almost withdrew it in again as she saw a bolt of lightning crackle in the sky some distance away. Pikachu is really getting a lot in here, maybe you should go ahead and stop now. Shaking his head as rain began falling heavily onto him, the boy yelled back over the increasing force of wind that was blowing. No. If Pikachu says he can handle it, then I'm gonna keep going. As if for emphasis, he went a little faster, breathing heavily as his sweat mixed with the rain falling down onto him. Misty drew her head in and looked back to see that the machine was almost maxed out. Even more so, Pikachu was now beginning to glow as the electricity filling his body formed a visible aura of yellow energy around him. Flint actually had to stand up and back away as sparks of electricity flew out of the small Pokémon in random directions and a blue haze of static filled the air. His and Misty's heads soon jerked in the direction of the generator as the machine surpassed its maximum output and began smoking. Before either one could move, the machine started to rupture as holes erupted on several sides of it, electricity crackled on its surface and smoke sputtered out of the generator like a tailpipe. At the same time, the glow surrounding Pikachu's body became even brighter and expanded until it started to fill the inside of the watermill. The air got harder to breathe, the arcs of electricity coming off of Pikachu became bigger and more widespread and his cheeks crackled viciously until the wires on his cheek pouches were nearly knocked off. Noticing how out of control the situation was becoming and also realizing that Pikachu himself was losing all control over his own body, Flint pushed on Misty's arm. Come on young lady, we need to get out of here now. That generator could blow at any minute, but I'm more worried about Pikachu. He's taken in a lot of electricity and I'm afraid he might be fixing to release some of it. Even though she didn't want to leave the small electric type, Misty could nonetheless see how dangerous the situation was becoming. Thus, she nodded and reluctantly followed Flint outside. Once they were outside on the riverbank, she cupped her hands over her cheeks and yelled above the pouring rain. "Ash, you need to get down from there. Pikachu's about to lose control." The boy saw and heard Misty yelling at him, but he couldn't hear. Slowly, he stopped running on the water wheel and eventually came to a stop before shouting back. What did you say?" However, he didn't need to hear her words to know what was going on since, suddenly, a blast of lightning shot through the roof of the watermill and into the sky. Turning his head upwards, Ash saw yet another thunderbolt blast through the roof and into the storming sky above. When he looked toward the building beside of him, he could just barely hear the sound of a loudly clanging generator, crackling electricity and sparks of lightning zapping everything they touched inside. Becoming concerned about his Pokémon immediately, Ash went to yell for him when a loud explosion went off inside. Compounding onto that, he saw several more large bolts of lightning shoot out of the watermill in random directions and soar into the sky. Each one exploding and smashing through the wood of the building like it were paper. The lightning blasts became so prevalent and hazardous that he had to duck down on the watermill every time a new one burst forth. Within seconds, the watermill had sustained intense damage with gaping holes all over its surface from where the lightning bolts escaped through. To make matters even worse, Ash noticed that actual lightning was now flashing straight overhead, and he could only guess it was because Pikachu's continual electric discharge was attracting it. Just when he was about to try climbing down in through the nearby window and retrieve Pikachu to escape, he found himself too late. Just when a particularly loud clap of thunder sounded overhead, it was immediately followed by a massive bolt of natural lightning suddenly falling straight from the heavens and striking the watermill. When this happened, it was as if a fire type had launched a spout of fire onto a pile of gasoline jugs. To Misty and Flint's horror, when the bolt of lightning struck the building, not only did it utterly destroy the watermill in a massive explosion, but it also knocked Ash from the waterwheel and far down into the dry riverbed. For his part, he saw the whole thing. Since one of Pikachu's earlier wayward blasts of electricity had blown a hole in the wall, Ash was able to see inside the watermill just before it was destroyed. Pikachu had been inside, totally consumed by the electrical power surge surrounding his whole body with arcs of lightning shooting in every direction. The generator was also on its last legs and appeared to be on the verge of exploding as well. When the bolt of natural lightning came out of the sky, Ash watched it tear straight through the roof before striking Pikachu. It was then the boy could tell that the lightning bolt had been attracted by all the electricity Pikachu had been emitting. Unfortunately, when the bolt struck him, it also made contact with the generator and caused it to finally explode. All of that combined together is what made the watermill go up in smoke and was also what sent Ash falling down into the river bed. "Ash!" Misty cried out as she sprinted across the rocky shoals and up to the side of the dazed boy after the initial explosion had ended. "Hey, are you okay? Ash, are you okay?" Feeling her shake him, the messy-haired trainer's eyes slowly blinked open. What? Groaning, he sat up with a wince and felt the soreness in his body from the fall. "What happened?" "A bolt of lightning struck the watermill and you went flying off," she answered with worry in her voice and on her face. "Are you all right? Does anything feel broken?" He slowly shook his head in reply and then looked toward the watermill. Seeing that it was now nothing but a smoking pile of ruins, his eyes widened and adrenaline caused him to jump to his feet. "No, Pikachu!" Before Misty could stop him, he ran full tilt up toward the smoking building and started looking around for his missing Pokémon. "Pikachu! Pikachu, where are you?" Calling out frantically for the small electric type, Ash continued his search with haste and searched all around the premises for his friend. At last, he saw Pikachu laying on the rocks several feet away from what remained of the watermill. "Pikachu!" Without any time to spare, he ran up to his Pokémon's side and dropped down next to him. Not seeing any visible signs of damage or injury on the small mouse, Ash quickly scooped him up. Though, when he did, he felt a strong electrical surge pass into his hands and through his body. Even though it was painful and caused him to wince, he nonetheless steadied himself and made sure not to drop Pikachu. As he pulled the electric type into his chest, Ash felt the strong static pull and electrical aura Pikachu was giving off, and it was like thousands of tiny needles pricking into his skin. Pi. Hey Pi, are you okay? Lightly shaking his Pokémon in his arms, Ash swallowed down the nervousness and panic he was feeling and just focused on trying to ascertain whether or not he was okay. Flint and Misty had rushed up to his side by then, but still he continued trying to rouse Pikachu. After what seemed like an eternity, he finally saw the little mouse's ears twitch and his cheeks spark. And even that felt strong enough to do the young man some level of discomfort and unease. At last, Pikachu's eyes slowly blinked open, and when they did, Ash could have sworn he saw what seemed like an electrical charge pass through them. Almost like yellow fire. Pi. Twitching his ears again, Pikachu blinked his eyes a few times and then looked around, confusion evident on his face as he registered his surroundings. Looking up at Ash soon, his nose wiggled and he tilted his head to the side. Pi. Pikachu. Smiling broadly in relief, Ash hugged his first Pokémon tightly to his chest and laughed. I'm so glad you're okay, buddy. You had me worried. Still, Pikachu seemed confused and he voiced it. Pikachu Pi. Pulling back a little, Ash looked at the yellow electric type and asked while looking him over. Are you okay, buddy? Are you hurt? Do you feel hurt anywhere? That was really intense what happened to you in there. You actually got struck by a bolt of lightning and it destroyed the whole building. Pikachu's eyes widened and he quickly looked and felt himself over before glancing at the smoking remains of the watermill. Afterwards, he looked back at his trainer and blinked. Pikachu Pi. The boy nodded. Yeah, you did. Are you sure you're okay? You totally maxed out that machine and it blew up too. I can't believe you aren't even a little singed. Are you positive nothing feels wrong? With total sincerity, Pikachu nodded like nothing had happened to him, even though his entire body was still giving off a strong static pull. Almost to the point where his fur glowed. I don't get it, Misty murmured in amazement. Pikachu absorbed all of that electricity from the generator and he even got struck by a bolt of lightning. How does he look totally normal? Shouldn't he at least be struggling or something, or act just a little bit odd after all that? He's not even accidentally shocking Ash or any of us. How is that possible? The rain having slowed to a more steady and gentle fall, Flint crossed his arms and stroked his beard. It's just as much a mystery to me as it is to you, Misty. By all accounts, Pikachu should either be fried or incapacitated right now. The fact it isn't leaves me at a loss for answers. Ash soon stood up while still holding Pikachu and then looked back at the other two. Pikachu seems fine, but I'd still like to take him to the Pokémon Center just so Nurse Joy can give him a checkup. They both nodded in agreement and then headed back to the city and the Pokémon Center. They left the scene of the ruined watermill behind without much